Podcasting worldwide from a studio inside global headquarters of RP Enterprises in Kansas City.
Hey, gang! Ladies and gentlemen, Papa's home!
This is the Papa Ron Podcast.
File transfer in progress.
With Ronnie Phillips and Jillian Gregg.
Showtime.
Yay! We're back! Yeah! It feels like forever since we've done a Papa Ron podcast episode, and it is good to be back. It's a special one in episode 43. I think the best way to lead into this is to talk about gratitude and empathy. If you're watching on Spotify or YouTube, I'm holding up this very fresh bag of gratitude and empathy coffee. This is something that we partnered with Dirty Duck Coffee on, it was a couple weeks ago. Really cool project where it's just as much about the mission as it is about the coffee. I was trying to find a way to create a revenue stream because let's face it, as much as this is about the mission, what we're doing is just as much, it is still a business, and we have to create a revenue stream to make this thing self-sufficient and put ourselves in the opportunity to build it and grow it and put marketing dollars behind it. And so instead of asking for people to give us a handout, because I don't subscribe to that mentality, how could I provide something of quality and something that people would be excited about? It would be a consumable, so hopefully they'd come back and buy more of it, and then be something that people love. And so it's a smooth Brazilian medium roast, and it's just as much about the mission of starting your day with gratitude and empathy. And that's kind of how this particular guest came to us today. And he's not just any guest; he's an old friend of mine. And when I say old friend, we're going back to our hometown of Marysville, Kansas. Welcome to episode 43, my old friend, Joe Jones.
Hey, Ronnie.
Okay, so we talked about this right before we started to hit record. It's a little weird for you to call me Ronnie.
Yeah, growing up as
you can call my real name for everybody. Let's just let the cat out of the bag. The real name is Phil Brucker, Philip Ronald Brucker. I got into radio, and I switched the middle name with the first name and then became Ronnie Phillips in an effort to protect my identity. So Joe knows me as Phil Brucker.
Wow. Yeah. Hey, listen, I have to tell you, when I've been watching you on the Papa Ron podcast, I've been quiet out there in the audience, not saying anything. But when I saw your gratitude and empathy, I had to get some because I'm a coffee nut. And then the coffee was just the part of the story, right? Mm-hmm. The actual words gratitude and empathy, that's what resonated with me in part of my journey we call life.
Yeah.
Those words resonated a lot with me. So certain we're going to dive into
We
that.
will. We'll break the ice and get into the deep, I'm not going to say dark stuff, but the deep stuff here in just a little bit. But before we go any further, you've tried the gratitude and empathy, and you're give us your overall opinion of it.
Yes. Here's the thing. Here's my candid, transparent disclosure. I like it dark. So I like that strong feeling. So what I do is I just add an extra tablespoon.
Yeah.
And that gives me the right potent kick that I need. So it's nice and smooth. It's lovely.
Good. I'm glad you like it. And you guys are drinking some right now. I just poured Jill her very first cup. She's got a bag that she's going to take home because I rudely forgot to give her a bag when we visited with Mark Alford.
But I really want the bag that's across the room that nobody can see.
Well, let's hold that up because that's available also. Now, that's a 5-pound hunker.
Look at that.
And listen, there's something else important to mention as we're talking about this, that if you go to dirtyduckcoffee.com and you enter the promo code PAPA, that's PAPA, you will be able to save not only on gratitude and empathy, but also any of their blends. So if gratitude and empathy isn't your jam and you would rather go with Dark Dynasty or High Velocity or Morning Wood, which is one of their blends,
right?
Along with any of their hats, hoodies, and t-shirts, you can use that promo code and you can save there. And so all of that by using the promo code, which is so important because that lets them know that we've sent traffic to them, and then we get a kickback for that, and that helps support our mission and what we're ultimately trying to do here. So this is probably going to be a little weird for you, Jill, because of the fact that Joe and I go back. You're gonna be able to hear some stories about the Black Squirrel City. You're going to be able to hear some old youthful stories of Joe and I back in our day, but feel free if something seems off or you're not tracking to jump in and ask any questions. All right.
I'm along for the ride.
Joe, I mentioned in a post that I put out, and first of all, if that made you uncomfortable, I apologize. I hope it didn't, but this is so personal to me, and I'm really excited about this, and I wanted to share it. And that's why I put it on my personal page. Because obviously I actually have more followers on my personal Facebook page than we do the Papa Ron page. And I wanted to get this out in front of as many people as possible. And there's going to be a lot of people from Marysville, our hometown, that are going to be excited to watch or see this, or watch or listen to this episode. Let's go back. Let's go back to Marysville real quick.
Let's do it.
And talk about what brought you. I mean, were you born in Marysville, or did your parents bring you to Marysville later? And kind of talk about how you grew up and where all that started.
Sure. So, little backstory. Yes, born and raised in lovely Marysville, Kansas, Community Memorial Hospital. I believe that's what the name of it still is.
Yeah.
Mom and dad met in the Air Force.
Okay.
They ended up, after dad got out of the Air Force, settling in Marysville, Kansas. And I have 4 other brothers, 2 other siblings raised with me in Marysville, Kansas. So going back to Marysville, Kansas, where do we dig in? Where do you want to start unraveling things?
Well, when we had our preliminary discussion, you talked a little bit about social status. And just kind of the way you were raised, and you talked about, your family making a switch and a spiritual switch. And so just kind of talk about what life was like for you as a child growing up, and some of the things that you started to learn as you were growing up, and even now as an adult looking back, that you kind of have learned.
No, appreciate it. Yeah, I'll do my best here. First of all, I want to just start by saying that these are my own experiences, and there's nothing that I want anyone to learn or take away from this other than we all have journeys in our life.
Sure.
And it all starts somewhere. And mine starts out, growing up in Marysville, Kansas, population, what is it, less than 3,000 people?
Probably right around 3,000.
So a very small rural farming community is pretty much how I've always described Marysville, Kansas. And, being raised in a family of 9 people, where you have a dad that works full-time job, mom's taking care of the kids and trying to work a full-time job. Socioeconomically, we were not the highest, in the highest socioeconomic status in Marysville, Kansas. I would probably argue that we were near poverty level, if not below poverty level, with the income that my parents made. But, growing up, socioeconomic status, that's one thing. As a kid, this is at least my experience when I go back and reflect on this. What did I want as a kid? I wanted to have fun. I wanted to be liked. I wanted to have good friends. The good friends and the being liked part, what does that really equate to? People crave to be loved. This is what I craved as a kid, but there were some obstacles that I found in my way, and one of those happened to be the faith, the spiritual faith that my family, or the religion that my family followed at the time, which was Jehovah's Witnesses. And growing up in a small rural town already, where everyone that is your neighbor knows your whole life story.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember this or not, Ronnie, but the Jehovah's Witness religion is a very small minority compared to, other religions. And so I'm sure you can, imagine that growing up it was almost like being ostracized because of your religion. And, being known as the kid that couldn't go to birthday parties, or the kid that couldn't participate in sports because that was deemed a worldly activity. Things that normal kids want to do growing up.
Yeah.
I didn't have to endure that, but my older brothers and sisters did. They weren't allowed to grow up like normal kids. Now, I don't want that to be misconstrued with that there's an issue with the Jehovah's Witness religion. I'm not here to judge that. But what I can tell you, that when you're a kid trying to grow up, do normal things, it's hard to do when you can't fit into the kids that are around in your community.
Right, right. So you mentioned that it changed between you and your other brother and older brother and older sister. So what happened there that changed?
So again, I don't know the exact reasoning because I was still 9 or 10 years old, but my father was disfellowshipped from the Jehovah's Witnesses because he smoked. He smoked cigarettes, and that's one of the things you can't do in that religion. So he was disfellowshipped, and so we stopped going to the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall.
Okay.
And so were we without religion or without organized religion for the rest of the time growing up? Yes. But I was fortunately the first child that was able to participate in sports, to do normal things that normal kids do growing up.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much what sets my course a little bit differently than my older siblings is I feel like they kind of got robbed a little bit.
Sure.
And maybe their lives would have taken different routes for them, but it is what it is. Anyways, growing up, with those pressures, it's something you remember. I often reflect my youth, my adolescent years as survival. If I'm to tell you the best way to describe it, survival.
Why do you think that is?
Wanting to fit in and knowing that you didn't.
Yeah.
Knowing that sometimes, you didn't always have as much as you wanted to eat. And it's not because my parents didn't want to.
Yeah.
It's just didn't have the means to. Yeah, I'm sorry. I could.
No. You're good, bro. And I want you to be as raw and authentic as possible and let the emotion flow. Is there any more that you wanted to add to that before I move on? I mean, not, if you don't, it's okay.
No, I would just say this, when I was able to start participating in these activities in the community, that's when, I started noticing people started looking at me maybe a little bit differently, like, oh, they're not with the Jehovah's anymore.
Gotcha.
That's what they would always say, the Jehovah's.
Yeah.
Anyways, I don't know how much else I can tell you other than it was a very, like I said, growing up, you want to fit in, you want to be liked, you want to be loved. And it's hard when you've got some of these other things that not everybody else has to deal with.
Yeah. You kind of grew up with the stigma.
So that made me think of two questions. And this is probably just me listening to your story as someone who doesn't know you. And he knew you then, right? At some point.
Yeah, for sure.
So as you're saying that about your siblings, it brought to mind two things. So one regarding religion, one not. So did you have some sort of guilt? Like, were your older siblings that couldn't do all those things still in the home and watching you get to do that stuff? And I know that stuff sounds, I totally understand what you're saying. That stuff sounds not important. Like, okay, sports, it's not a make it or break it deal for a kid if a kid doesn't play sports. But when you're a kid and you want to fit in, it's a big deal. And so were those older siblings in the home for that transition and getting and watching you? And were you the kind of personality that maybe held some guilt? Like, oh, I get to do this and my brother didn't, or I get to do this and my sister didn't. And then did that cause any friction in the rest of your growing up time, teenage years, that kind of thing?
That's actually a great question. I don't think it was really apparent at the time, the feelings of guilt. It's a great proposition, actually. But it's not until later in life that you realize these things. In the moment, you're just like, oh, cool, I get to be a wrestler now. I get to play football. But during, my high school years, I did think about, what if my older brother, Jimmy, my oldest brother, by the way, was one of my mentors growing up, probably not for the best reasons, but was one of my mentors growing up. And he never got to play sports. And I always thought that he would have been just a rock star athlete. And his life would have turned out different than what it has today.
When you say Jimmy, I know him as John Paul.
No, that's
okay.
John. You know
Okay.
John Paul. You
I
don't know Jimmy.
I don't know Jimmy.
You don't know Jimmy, the big brother.
No, I don't.
J Bear.
Okay. Would it be fair to say then that would be the same for John Paul?
No. Similar, but John Paul and I were the ones that fought all the time growing up. We had a neighbor. John would beat my butt all the time. And I just always remembered the one thing that I hated as a kid is when my sibling would grab my hair and yank it back. And John was always the sibling that I fought with. And then finally came that one point in time where I was like, I'm not taking this anymore. And I fought back. But Jimmy was the one that, did all the cool things that were bad.
Yep.
That as a kid you thought were cool.
Yeah.
And you want to kind of emulate some of that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Drinking Mad Dog 2020 for the first time when you're 11 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because your older brother said, hey, you want to try this?
Yeah.
Of course you do.
Yeah.
It's your bigger brother. Had their childhood been different, would they be different today? I don't know. But I often think about how the community that you're in, how it helps nurture you or doesn't nurture you, how your family helps nurture you or does the best they can.
Sure.
So then now all your siblings that remember that transition of Jehovah's Witness, not Jehovah's Witness, what is their faith or religious standing now? Like, because that can be something like that can be turn out great, and then it can turn out not great. There can be, people call it church hurt, if you want to call it that. But I just am curious how that played out.
I'm not going to answer for all of my siblings, but I'll offer you this. Every single one of the Jones siblings are spiritual. They believe in the Father and they believe in the Son. I can tell you that.
Okay.
How they lean today, I don't know. What I would summarize it to most people is I'm a Christ follower, and that's just how I profess me.
Right. It's not about a denomination.
Not about a denomination. It's not about any fancy bells and whistles. I believe that God sent his Son to this earth to die for me and for everyone else, and I am thankful for that. And I don't need a label or anything else to go with that. And so just to kind of catch you up to date with where I am today, yes, that's who I am today, as a Christ follower. Do I go to a Baptist church in Texas? Absolutely. But I'm a Christ follower. That's the be all and end all.
And are you close with all your siblings or no?
I am close with them today.
Okay.
But it hasn't always been that way.
We'll get into that.
Yeah.
Because I know most of them. I never knew Jimmy, but I know John Paul. I know Jeremiah. I know Jake. And those would probably be the ones that I know the most or the best.
That's right.
Or had some sort of interaction with growing up. You talked about fighting with John Paul. I'm going to transition into fighting because you talked about being a survivor. I was 4 years younger than you. And as I'm growing up in Marysville, Kansas, and I'm learning about Joe Jones, I'm learning that Joe Jones is a badass that you don't want to mess with.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like, now you can imagine, like, if you're 13, I'm
9 or 10.
Yeah. So, like, this is like magnified even though 4 years isn't that much of a difference when you get older, but at that time it is.
At that time it is.
So you're walking down the street, you're at the city pool, whatever it is. That's Joe Jones. Oh boy, I don't want to piss that guy off. If I look at him wrong, if I say something wrong.
I'm sure the stories get a little bit elevated.
They're exaggerated.
Between, you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, depending on how many times they're told.
Totally exaggerated. Yeah. But I guess where I wanted to go with this, and something that we discussed in our preliminary discussion is that you learned at an early age that you had to be a fighter. When was that, from the fights that you would have with your older brother, John Paul? Or did you just get to a point sometime in your life where you got sick and tired of being bullied because of your social status that you felt like was being laid upon you, that you just didn't want to put up with the bullshit anymore and you started swinging?
I can tell you specifically when my brother taught me to fight, because I came home. Yeah, I don't know if you remember where the Boy Scouts clubs was.
100%.
Over there.
Yeah.
But we would often go over there and just hang out, get out of the house. And I don't remember the reason I went over there, but I went over there one day, and I remember, I don't remember all the events, but I remember Jeff Wassenberg.
Really?
And I remember Heath Talbot.
Okay.
And all I remember is I went home with a shirt filled full of sandburrs stuck in my shirt. So I can't remember if Jeff and Heath and I fought or they pushed me down or what, but I went home crying.
How old were you? I'm going
to guess.
What you would guess?
Maybe between 8 and 10.
Okay.
And so I come home, I'm crying. My bigger brother, Jimmy, he's like, "What's the matter?" And I was like, I'm sure I told him the story that I got pushed down, and he's like, "Well, we're going to go back there right now and you're going to kick their asses."
How much older was Jimmy than you?
He's 7 years older than me.
Okay. So he's like 18, 17, something like that?
He's 15, 16, something like that.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So he tells me, "This is what you're going to do." And he tells me, he's like, "You're going to knee him in the nuts, and then you're going to," and he tells me all these things to do. So what do? I go back there and I fight Jeff Wassenberg.
Does he come with you, or you go by yourself?
I can't remember, but I remember going back and fighting with Jeff Wassenberg and Heath Talbot. And all I can remember is my brother happy because I won.
Was that just a bunch of pent up anger that you think just...
Were they older also? Were those boys?
They're the same age.
Same
age. Okay.
Yeah.
Same age. Yeah.
What happened after that? Was that then just where you started getting confidence in yourself?
Yeah. Confidence.
Is that a defining moment? It's ultimately where I'm going at.
It was a defining moment. It was definitely a juncture in my life where confidence did step up a bit, because I was always getting beat up until that one point. And then from there on out, you're right. I don't know what happened. I became a brawler. I don't think because I wanted to. I just think growing up, I was taught to fight or fly.
Did you get in trouble at home? Like your parents did? Was it the kind of fights that it would be visible that you're beat up?
No,
and you get in trouble. Okay,
no.
okay.
We never really got into those kinds of fights growing up as kids. It was usually a right, a left. Take them down to the ground and it's over.
Yeah.
You'd go down
uncle, and you let him go.
You'd go down to when we were in high school, the common place everybody knew, if you wanted to fight, you went down to the railroad, to the train locomotive. "Hey, meet me over the train locomotive. We're going to fight." That's usually how we'd fight.
Okay.
Well, I tell you what, I'm just going down memory lane here. I mean, we never got into anything like that. I was way too young, and I was way too scared to get cross paths with Joe. And actually, I mentioned this in that post that I put out there. Joe, actually, my mom worked in the school. She was at the time, the junior high secretary. Okay. And I think you were a senior, and you were an aide for my mom. You remember that?
I do.
I'm sure my mom's going to listen to this. What memories do you have about that?
That's
selfishly, I'm asking this question.
You probably have a better memory than I do, because when I was my last couple of years in high school, all I really cared about was sports, making it out of high school, and having a girlfriend.
Well, I remember Joe kind of taking me under his wing a little bit. It wasn't like we were around each other a lot. But I remember there was times where we would have interaction, and I felt like, okay, the badass Joe Jones that I know, no one's going to mess with me because that guy,
he's on your side.
He's going to have my back.
Yeah.
He either sees me as the good kid, it's nobody needs to pick on or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I was the water boy on the football team.
Okay.
And I remember we talk about this all the time when we reconnect, and you actually bring up Tom Knott on kind of the influential people in your life. I remember Joe's in a very important, I don't know if it was a playoff game but it was a game towards the end of the season.
I think it was either Atchison or Hutchison, one of those two teams.
Atchison, but it was at Marysville.
Yeah, that's right.
It was at Marysville, and Joe got blown up and got a concussion.
But do you remember how? Do you remember how?
I don't.
So here's the interesting thing. So, in sports, or at least this is my experience growing up, they always tell you, if you want to be noticed, be on special teams. So I always made a point, coach, put me in special teams, So the one thing I got to do was be on kickoff team.
Yeah.
And I loved being on kickoff team. And I remember Coach Michael always saying, go down that field with a reckless abandon and just nail him, Jonesy. That's what he would say.
Yeah.
And so during that game, I think I got the concussion after I hit somebody and bounced off and landed on my head after the hit. I think that's how the concussion came about.
I do remember now it being a kickoff. And I remember that you got the concussion. They pulled you out. You were messed up.
Yeah.
Like you weren't all there. And you were, I remember Greg Stows.
Yeah, Greg.
Who was a manager of the football team. He was on, the coaches put him on your details. Like you do nothing but stand next to him the rest of the game and just make sure he's okay. And Joe, who you never saw cry, ever. Joe never showed a tear. He never showed emotion.
Bawling.
Yeah, he was just overwhelmed. And I'm like, holy shit, that's Joe Jones crying. What is this about?
And you were crying because you were in pain, or because you were like, this could be
he wasn't
the end?
there.
You just weren't
just
yourself.
Delusional.
Yes.
Didn't know what time it was. Didn't know why I'm here.
And the reason I bring up Coach Tom Knott is you kept repeating over and over and asking Greg over and over again, is Coach not pissed at me? Is Coach not pissed at me? Is Coach not pissed at me? Which I'm going to crack a joke before we get into Coach Knott. How many times did you have to bear crawl to Mound City?
Oh my God.
That was Coach. Did Coach ever say that to you on the practice field like he did to us?
Oh,
because there was always that big mound of dirt over there on the practice field. And if you screwed up, it was like, bear crawl to Mound City.
Yes, we all had to go through our rituals, didn't we?
Yes. But talk about the influence that Tom had on you.
It's interesting. It's not just Tom Knott. It's his wife. It's his wife as well.
Okay.
For all intents and purposes, and as an all-encompassing outreach, listen, most of the teachers, most of the coaches were so positively influential in my life. Tom Knott, here's the interesting thing about, and I'm sorry, Coach Knott, if you're listening to this or when you listen to this, but I try to give a little respect and still call him, I've never got into that first name basis with our elders and our coaches and stuff. So Coach Knott, the interesting thing about him is he was also in the Air Force like my father. And he had very, very strong, just basic respectful principles for you to follow. And you followed them, because if you didn't, were you afraid he was going to be pissed? Yeah. But I think for me, I always felt like I was afraid to let him down. And he was my first wrestling coach.
That's right.
He was my first wrestling coach in junior high.
Yeah.
And, I remember that when we went into the 8th grade, that he allowed me to start wrestling with the high school wrestling team to get more experience. And just throughout my, my upbringing, Coach Knott's always been somewhere involved, and he was always a guiding force. He's not always the nicest guy, didn't always have the best humor, but he cared about us. And that's the one thing that I could feel about Coach Knott.
Yeah. I think when you talked about their growing up at an age where you were trying to feel loved and accepted and figure out your status and where you kind of fit in, that was a guy who saw something in you, believed in you, and you saw that, you felt it, and it made you want to perform for him. Is that
sure? No, sure. I think one of the things that I'd like is probably pretty important to inject here is because Coach Knott always, I think, he always knew our situation, the situation that we discussed.
Yeah.
Growing up, being ostracized for the religion that we're in, not having a lot of money, and really fighting to make ends meet. at the same time having a dad, who's going through his throes in alcoholism, and you seeing that as a kid growing up. So Coach Knott knew what Joe Jones was going through, and I think he saw potential in me, and that's why he cared so much.
Yeah. Sports being such a big part of your turning the curve, if you will, in life.
Sure.
I'm sure there were other coaches that had pretty significant influence. I mean, you talked about Coach Michael, Coach Pete, Coach Philippi. I mean, I don't know if he's on the list, but like, just kind of mention some of those and how they directly, people from Marysville are going to love this. Anybody outside of Marysville may not get it or understand it. And I hope that you stick around through this, because we're going to get into some stuff that is going to be relevant to anybody from any walk of life, listening. But for a moment, let's talk about Marysville and those people.
Sure. You think of those profound moments in your life that you think about that are milestones. And if I were to ask you from the 80s and growing up, I'll pick two profound moments in life that you'll probably remember. And one was in 1983. If I believe that's correct. I was in Miss Pullman's class, and that's when Mount St. Helens erupted. That's one profound moment I remember growing up.
Okay.
The second one I remember being in, what was the science teacher's name? Mr. Smith.
Yeah.
When in 1986, when the Challenger exploded.
I was going to say, I remember exactly. I remember exactly where I was when that happened. So
these are events that, you remember growing up. And so if you get past the elementary years, get into the sports and whatnot, the impact right away, the ones that I mentioned, Coach Knott, he's one of the first ones to mention. Coach Pete, Coach Philippi. These two guys are the ones that helped make me into a young man. I don't know how else to say it. Coach Philippi, the one thing that guy taught me, and by the way, just a little side note here. I see Coach Philippi probably once every 90 days.
Really?
Down in Mesquite, Texas. I drive up from Houston to our plant in Mesquite, and I make sure and stop in and see him every time.
Is he doing good?
He's doing great.
Tell him I said hi.
I will. So Sam's one of the other ones, and, because of Sam, he got me not to be so worried all the time. He always told me to focus. He would always point at me and say, breathe in through your nose, out through your mouth. That's the one thing that he knew if he could get me to control, that I would make it through the entire 3 periods. And after Coach Philippi, listen, I've got a ton of, Coach Philippi, one thing I want to add there. My senior year, I won the Kevin Scheller Award for wrestling, and
which, explain what that award is. Anybody from Marysville who doesn't know, most outstanding wrestler of the year, right?
Yeah. But it's not because I won state. It's not because I was runner up. It's because every practice I gave 100% and more during our workouts.
Right.
During our calisthenics. It's because of Coach Pete and Sam Philippi that drove me and guided me. I mean, if I'm being fully transparent, it's because of those two guys.
Right.
In football, Coach Michael's the one that gave me opportunities that no other coach would give me. I was a sophomore, and I started getting in. I was on special teams. But then they started letting me play in strong safety in the secondary. And then one game, it was, I believe, our junior year, Coach Nish was the defensive coach, and he said he wanted me to fill in for nose guard. And I said, wow, okay. Now, granted, in Kansas, 4A school at that time, the average line is anywhere between, let's just call it 190 and 220. And here Joe Jones is at a healthy 130. And, but they wanted me to shoot the gaps. They wanted me to disrupt the backfield, and I did really good at it. And again, their faith and belief in me, hopefully some of my performance, is what made me a starting nose guard for our Marysville High School Bulldog team, our junior and senior years. And, through the support and coaching from all the coaches, my senior year, I won the NCKL All Nose Guard for Marysville High School.
I think they had to have seen, one, you were quick, and two, you're just tough as hell. You're just tough. Like, you have to be tough to play that position. And when somebody your size can go up against somebody who's bigger and stronger than you and keep coming and keep coming and keep coming, that is demoralizing for the other guy who's bigger than you on the other side, right? And when you can get through them fast, being as quick as you were, and get in the backfield, I mean, that's what they had to see. And you just got to be tough. You were a tough son of a gun. Yeah. Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, it's all started from that upbringing of survival.
Yeah.
Survival of the fittest. And that's the only thing I knew how to do is to be tough on the outside.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to bring up this guy because he's someone who I've also had a pretty good relationship with over the years. John O'Borney.
Oh gosh, absolutely. You can't mention my life without mentioning John O'Borney.
So what point? So John O'Borney, Jill.
And everyone listening.
And everyone listening. Yes.
Because, I mean, we are going to have
all five of you who are listening. No, I'm joking.
I don't know.
John was a wrestler. He was a football player. His dad was the superintendent of the district.
Okay.
And at what point in time was it that you and John became best friends? Because you guys were inseparable. Yeah. You were everywhere together. And that's where it kind of, again, and I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. Like, so John lived next to a classmate of mine, Pat Landau, whose dad owns Landau Corporation, which is a big thing in Marysville. Okay. And so I lived just down the street from Pat, and I would spend time with Pat, which means then I would cross paths with John and Joe all the time.
But not mess with them.
No,
not mess with them.
I mean, we got to a point then later in life, like I knew that, I wasn't scared, but anyway, John and you have been so close for many, many years. At what point, what was it that brought you guys together? I would have to say it was wrestling.
Well, yeah, wrestling's definitely a part of it, but let me try to give you the chronology of the Joe Jones, John O'Borney history, because this is really important. John will tell you that his first memory of us together was in second grade when I tried to steal some of his football cards or something. But nonetheless, wrestling is definitely where it started, but throughout, this relationship's really important because it's helped define, my relationship with John, what we've been through in our own journeys in life definitely is a result of, I am a result of that, that positive influence that him and I've had with one another. So John and I, if you just fast forward, grew up in Marysville together, started wrestling together. But one thing before we started wrestling, when we were 12 years old, before we wrestled in junior high, this quick little story. This is one of the moments that, when you're a kid, you'd see kids would become blood brothers. They'd prick their pins and they do that.
Oh yeah.
Well, we've got something a little deeper than that, how John and I really became connected. When I was 12 years old, it was my brother, John, it was myself, and we were fishing in this little pond. If you would take Debbie Lane down and you would take Park Place down, and it would come out, and there was this pond right over on this one side. So we went fishing there. We weren't catching any fish. Here come Ronnie Buck and Chad Williams.
Okay, so I don't know Chad Williams, but I do know Ron Buck very well. And you might know the name because of Buck Roofing here in Kansas City.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, so Ron Buck owns that, and we all grew up together.
Gotcha.
Anyways, so at that moment, we decide that, I'm going to go with Chad and Ronnie because they're going to go, they had a BB gun and they were going to go hunting rabbits.
Okay.
Hunting squirrels, hunting varmints.
You're 12?
Yes.
Okay.
Don't see anything to hunt. Don't get anything. We're heading back. I'm crossing over a fence. a barbed wire fence. Ronnie and Chad are still behind the fence. I turn around. Ronnie's looking at me, kind of grinning, pointing a BB gun at me. And I said, come on, Ronnie, knock that off. Because my dad was always a stickler.
Don't point a gun.
Don't point a gun at people.
Yeah.
And he would refuse to let any of us have BB guns growing up as kids. And before I knew it, boom, I feel a pain in my underneath my armpit. I look down to see if Ronnie really shot me. And he did. And I didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I can't breathe. And I look down and I look at my shirt just to make sure there's not a hole in it, maybe thinking it bounced off. And all of a sudden I see a little blood trickle coming out of the side of my body. And this is where the relationship with John and I really started, because it's at that point, I go home, John goes home. We're just going to rub some dirt on it and act like nothing happened, put a Band-Aid on it. And well, John's conscience wouldn't let him do that. So he told his mom, if you know something about something that happened, what do you think I should do? Well, of course, your parents are going to say, well, George was his nickname. George, or you should probably tell, what it is that's on your mind. So he let the cat out of the bag that Joe got shot. Well, next thing that happens is I'm in the kitchen. My mom gets a phone call. I see her back in the time, it was a rotary dial phone.
Yeah.
And we only had one phone in the house. Mom's on the phone in the kitchen. I see her eyes getting big. No words are coming out of her mouth. Her mouth comes open. She hangs up the phone. She grabs me by the arm, takes me to the living room where my dad is sitting in the recliner with his TV tray eating his dinner. My mom continues to say, go ahead, tell him what happened.
Oh boy.
And just instantly I burst into tears. I got shot. I got shot by a BB gun, Dad.
Oh man.
And the thing is, I wasn't so much afraid of the BB gun.
You're afraid
being
of your
shot.
dad.
I was afraid that I was going to get the belt because my dad always said to stay away from the BB guns.
Yeah.
Let alone here I am possibly dying. That's when I saw the look on my dad's face where it wasn't rage. It was fear.
Mm-hmm.
He was fearing, that his son might be dying. Anyway.
We'll talk about the injury. Like what was it? It wasn't just like a little BB bounced off you. Like it was a serious injury.
Yeah, no, it was definitely a serious injury. I didn't quite understand it until after we did the CAT scan, but so it was a 177 caliber, BB gun, one of those Crossmans that you can pump up, and it will shoot just like a 22 caliber rifle.
Yep. And
so what happened is the BB went in my right side mid rib cage, and it penetrated and traveled entirely across the inside of my body to the opposite rib cage, broke a rib, ricocheted back, and lodged in my liver. And since the age of 12, I've had a BB lodged in my liver.
Did you have to go to the hospital? And
I went to Community Memorial Hospital. They took x-rays first because I couldn't breathe. And then we did a CAT scan. And that's, again, if it hadn't been for John doing that, quite frankly.
Yeah, who knows what, so what did they do for you in that situation? They didn't have surgery, right?
And so that's just it, right? There's nothing they could do besides give me some antibiotics, some meds. That was it.
Wow. So I have to ask then, what happened to Ron Buck after that? Surely, he was held accountable in some way, shape, or form, right?
Well, listen, I don't.
You don't remember?
I really don't remember much of after that. I can tell you this, that Ronnie and I have talked since then. We have caught up over the years, not obviously as frequently as some of us, but we've made amends from our past.
So I don't know if this is fair to say, but as that young guy growing up in Marysville, it was Joe and Ron Buck. Ron Buck was the big dude who was bigger and stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And Ron was always really, really, really good to me. So if he happens to listen to this, I don't want to sound ungrateful. I'm just telling it like it is.
Yeah.
He actually was another one that took me under his wing. He coached me in a couple youth basketball leagues. Mm-hmm. He was the guy that was like, hey man, if you ever want to wear my Shrine Bowl, jersey to school, he was that guy who kind of looked after me too. Mm-hmm. But there was this rival between you two. Is that fair to say? He was the bully and you were the guy who didn't put up with this crap.
I wouldn't say there was a rivalry, actually, because
you guys fought more than once, though.
I'd just say that I think our personalities are ones that don't back down. I think that's the best way to say it.
That's really fair. Yeah, I see that.
And I think when you have engaging personalities, and when you see, in my case at that time, when you see somebody that you think is going a little bit beyond what they should, and you called it a bully.
Is that fair?
Yeah, because I think if I'm being fully transparent, I think all of us had a little bulliness, especially those that fought, those that wanted to survive.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean but hey, I mean, like I said, that's growing up in small rural America, dude. What else do you expect?
Yeah, no, definitely. It's definitely a different world that we live in today. I mean, we talked about this before too, like growing up in a small town, 3,000 people, it was nothing for me to get on my bike. And whether I lived on 14th Street across from Dargett's Park, or we lived on Debbie Lane, I'd get on my bike and a tackle box in one hand and a fishing pole in the other and ride clear across town to the country club lake and go fishing. You wouldn't see
gone all day long.
All day.
Even my husband says that
without any adults, any parental guidance.
Right, even about Lee Summit. And because you guys are about the same age, he says the same thing about being an adolescent and young teenager before he would drive, even in Lee Summit, which obviously has grown exponentially since he's been a kid. But still, he's like, I'd leave first thing in the morning and not come back till dark, and nobody knew where I was or what I was doing, and probably not for the best.
Think about the times like we lived on the north side of Highway 36, and the pool was on the southwest side of town, the city pool. Mm-hmm. And so we're crossing, which is, I guess, considered a major highway, not an interstate, but a highway in Kansas. And it was nothing just to cross that highway, to go down, you're riding your bike. But like today, in today's society, with the human trafficking and all the craziness that's going on, I would never, ever even fathom letting my child do that.
Yeah, very good point. Let me stitch in some more just about, because, I don't want to get off on too many tangents here, but I want to finish up about, John O'Borney, because the thing with John and I, once we were involved in wrestling, so the first wrestling experience with John O'Borney when we were 7th grade, he ended up winning in the final, the match that him and I had against each other. So that was the turning point where John started shooting up in terms of being, hey, this is going to be a good wrestler. But the thing that kept us together is John always had tough time making weight. And I was this friend that always, wanted to be hanging out with him. I didn't want to be at home. I wanted to be out doing something. And so we would always go to the wrestling room the night before the wrestling match. And I would always stay the night at his house. I ended up staying, a lot of time at his house during wrestling season. And that's really where our bond just kind of grew and kept developing. We dated girls up in Beatrice, Nebraska at the same time together. When we did graduate, or before graduating high school, just kind of a snippet to weave in here. I knew that I was not ready for college when I was graduating Marysville High School. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And we talk about, or at least I talk about, when do kids start talking about what they want to do? And I was never really one of those kids that had this like shining moment where I said, I want to be X. But what I can tell you is I can remember when I decided that I was going into the U.S. Coast Guard. That was a profound moment for me because it was not planned. I was a junior. It was my junior summer in high school. And I come home. Dad's waiting for us to come home. We get home. He's like, all right, I'm going up to bed. And I'm like, all right, great. I keep the Zenith 27-inch TV on, little dials that you have to turn.
Yeah.
And I'm not even necessarily watching TV, but all of a sudden, here comes this commercial.
Wow.
And in this commercial, there's this boat that's speeding through the ocean pass, and it's throwing these bales of something over the side of the boat. And then all of a sudden, here comes this white boat behind it with this blue light spinning. And then from stage left comes this helicopter cruising in over the drug boat. And it sounded like Airwolf. I don't know if you remember.
Of course, I remember watching. I know the song.
So, and then from the side of the screen comes Lou Gossett Jr. And he says, if you want to be a part of the action, join the Coast Guard today. Hook,
line
and sinker.
Wow.
I went to my dad and I said, hey, Dad, I'm thinking about going into the military. And he said, okay. And I don't even know if my brothers or sisters even actually know that this conversation that my dad and I had. He goes, I'm just going to give you some advice. He goes, when you go in the military, you're going to train and train and train and train until a war comes along. And then when a war comes along and you have to participate in it, like he did, then you're going to know that it's the worst mistake you've ever made in your life.
Wow.
Because he said there is nothing glorious about war. Mm-hmm. And so for me, when I saw this Coast Guard thing and I started investigating it and realizing what it was, I said to him, well, hey, Dad, you don't have to worry about that because I'm looking in the Coast Guard and they save lives. They don't take lives. And he's like, son, I will support whatever your decision is. And so I got into the latent enlistment program as a junior, going into my senior year into high school. I wanted to tell that side note real quick, but John and I I went off into the Coast Guard. John went into the Marines. We stayed in touch the entire time.
Did you guys have conversation with one another before making that? Because I remember vividly John telling Pat and I that he was going to go in the Marines. And at the time I was like, Marines is going to eat you up, bro. Like, that's what my mentality was. But like, you guys obviously were, did very well for yourselves, but being as brothers that you were,
yeah,
surely you guys were having conversations. I'm thinking about doing this. Well, I'm thinking about doing this. You remember what those conversations looked like?
Well, it's interesting because when I left, it's like when I left for the Coast Guard boot camp on 27th August 90, it's pretty much that was my disembarkation from Marysville life and everybody in it for as far as I'm concerned, because I was starting a new life for myself.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that I didn't care about the people back in Marysville. It's just like I was focused on my new Coast Guard career as an 18-year-old kid.
Yeah.
So yes, did I talk to John? He was living in Manhattan at the time. I wasn't 100% certain what he was going to do. And then when he did finally tell me, I thought it was cool because he was coming out to California where, he was going to be in San Diego, going to the MCRD down there for the Marine Corps. And then he got stationed in Oceanside at Camp Pendleton. I was in Long Beach. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
So there wasn't a lot of comfort. I thought John made that decision when he was in high school. He was moved out or was out of high school when he made the decision to join the Marines.
I really don't know.
I thought anyway. Well, bro, the story gets a little bit deeper after getting into the Coast Guard, right? And this is where anybody who, if you've made it this far into the podcast, you need to stick around because this has the ability to touch a lot of people's lives, whether it's you personally, because it's something that you've gone through, or maybe it's somebody that you know, but this now becomes a conversation that isn't so centered on Marysville and the people around it. Although there is some people still on this list that I want to get to before this conversation is over.
Sure.
Let me preference this by saying that the reason that we're actually here talking about this again is because we had a conversation about gratitude and empathy. And I had put I put a post out there basically promoting the coffee, and Joe didn't send me a note and say, hey, tell me more about the coffee. Hey, I'm going to buy some coffee. All of a sudden I get a picture sent to me in a private message of him with a bag of coffee. And I was like, wow, Joe's paying attention, which didn't really, I mean, I say, wow, like I was honored, not surprised.
Yeah.
Joe had been good about reaching out to me through the years and saying, whether it's Heartland Waterfowl or things I was doing at the radio station, and just lifting me up and being proud and just having conversation, reconnecting, which was really cool because it was a guy that I looked up to in my youth. So now he's supporting me with buying this coffee. And I was like, man, thank you so much. I don't remember, I'm paraphrasing how the conversation went, but it was, just like, thank you. This is just as much about the mission as it is about the coffee, which then he follows up with a reply with like, hey, your podcasts have resonated with me more than you know, because I've had my own bout with depression and anxiety. And I was like, whoa. Okay. I mean, I knew a little bit about his past, obviously, and everything that we've discussed here.
Sure.
I looked at him as a tough kid. I looked at him as the man of honor, or man of honor, but the word I'm trying, armor is the word I'm looking for.
Right.
Like he's
unbreakable.
Yes. And so now this guy who I've had this vision of, and then I've seen his success. Like the guy he went to Coast Guard, he comes out and he's doing all these things and his life is elevating. And I don't know that a lot of the stuff that he's a struggle he's getting into. So all that to be said, I preference that with saying that the gratitude and empathy, the coffee is what kind of brought this whole thing together, where then we have a conversation and you start diving into the path that you went down after joining the Coast Guard.
Yeah. So, there's a little groundwork to kind of, or a little perspective, I should say, to add here to kind of complete everything. One of the important changes that also took place in my life, when my dad came back from Vietnam, he had a very difficult time adjusting, turned to alcohol, turned to drugs to cope as coping mechanisms to deal with it. So as a young man, I grew up watching my father drink himself to death, essentially. And that all changed when I was just before I became a junior in high school. My dad stopped drinking. He stopped drinking. He got clean. He got sober, and he started helping other people, with this same issue that they were having with alcoholism. But now, as I depart for the Coast Guard and I graduate from boot camp at the end of 1990, I get stationed at my first duty station on the Coast Guard cutter Venturous, which is a 210-foot medium endurance cutter stationed in Terminal Island, California, which is in the LA Harbor, right between Long Beach and right between San Pedro. And I remember being this Kansas kid in this big California town and not feeling one bit like I fit in at all, because I'm this kid from Kansas that has manners, that has etiquette, even though Coach Pete would often say, Jonesy, where's your couth? I had couth these days. And, I'm in California and, you're a kid, young man, you want to fit in, you want to go hang out, you go to parties, right? You go to clubs and whatnot. And nonetheless, I have a great early Coast Guard career. I'm the youngest person on our ship that gets sent to maritime boarding school up in Petaluma, California, because our first lieutenant says, Jonesy, if you pass all your classes before E3, before 6 months is up, I'll let you go to the school. So I did it. So I was the youngest, for all intents and purposes, law enforcement officer on our vessel.
Wow.
Got to see some really exciting things, from basically the Bering Sea and the Aleutian Chain, all the way down to Canada, Washington, Oregon, California, all the way to Acapulco, Mexico. I got to see as an 18-year-old kid. And, as these experiences are, being lived out, we pull into one of our first ports. This is my first year in the Coast Guard. And it was up in either Oregon or Washington. And we pull in. One of my shipmates says, "Hey, let's get a room together so we don't have to stay on the ship." And I'm like, "Great, let's do that." We come back to the room later, and I've got a girlfriend. I said, "Hey, I found a girl, and I'm going to bring her into the room." And he's like, "No, I'm not doing that. You can just keep the room and pay for it yourself." Well, I was upset with that. So I fought him and experienced my first non-judicial punishment in the United States military because I assaulted a shipmate and caused a contusion to his eye. So I get in trouble. It's called non-judicial punishment. I get in trouble for this, what's called an alcohol incident. And subsequently sent to the Navy station in Long Beach when we come back for drug and alcohol counseling to make sure I don't have, a problem with alcohol. I'm like,
is it still that way? Do you know? Like now, is that
it's worse.
Common?
It's worse.
Okay.
Yeah, it's worse. Back when I was serving, you could probably, I think, have 3 alcohol incidents before they kicked you out. Today, I think you get 1.
Oh, wow. And
then you get kicked out.
Okay.
Wow.
So, needless to say, that was my first bump in the road, but I rebounded. I resented, I had resentments for what I did, but I made my amends with everybody. I moved on with my life. I was doing great. And we're off 1991. We're off the coast of Washington. And this is probably the most impactful time in my life because at the time, we didn't have cell phones. Everything that we got for messages that were urgent came from teletype. And so I was up on watch on the bridge. When you're in the Coast Guard as a seaman, you spend a 4-hour watch, 1 hour up on the flying bridge looking for contacts, 1 hour down below driving the ship, and you do that for 4 hours alternating. And I remember our storekeeper, our office guy, came up to the bridge and asked the officer of the deck if he could grab Seaman Jones. He had something he wanted to tell him. And so Mike brings me outside, and he hands me a teletype letter, and it said, "Please inform Joseph Jones that his father has been diagnosed with stage 4 terminal cancer." And I'm over the emotions, but as we relive it, the emotions are going to come back out. So I apologize, but so that was the beginning of my dark days. My father, for as much as I didn't like that he did growing up, as much as he made me afraid, he was changing his life, and he was my biggest fan when I wrestled, when I played sports.
Yeah.
And he was the proudest father that I was his first son to join the military. And to get that teletype was like it was just as much he died right then. But that was at the beginning. It was March, April of 91, and he passed away in November of 91. And that's the point where I don't know if you recall in our conversation where I pretty much became the black sheep of our family. I disconnected from everybody. I didn't make it a point to. My father was my rock. It wasn't my siblings, even though that's not true. My siblings were as well.
Yeah.
But at the time, that wasn't apparent to me. And so when that happened, it was just a very impactful time in my life. And when I buried my father, to go back to bury my father, again, it was just, I believe that our life is filled full chapters in this journey that we go through. And that was a chapter in my life that I was glad to close the chapter on. But it wasn't the last time that I'd be impacted by it. If we fast forward, throughout my military career, while I'm on the West Coast, I make it through, end up going to school. I end up leaving that ship in Long Beach in November of 1992 for my specialty school, which is called storekeeper, which in layman's terms means you do supply and logistics. And that's what I went to specialty school, or A school, for in the Coast Guard up in Petaluma, California. Now, this is important, okay? So I want to get rid of, the emotions here for a second, because this next part in my journey is very important, because we talked earlier about faith growing up. But at some point, there was a moment where I was impacted by divine intervention. Mm-hmm. And that was when I went to Coast Guard A School in 1992. It was, again, and I apologize in advance. I'm going to make a lot of movie references, because
it's all right, bro.
This is just part of how I
it's all good.
Talk about things. But I remember...
do you have Kleenex somewhere?
Yeah,
no, I've got one. Sorry.
You do? Oh, no, I just didn't want you to feel like you feel like we're stuck.
I was actually waiting for a spot for you to stop to say, Jill, can you do me a favor and run upstairs and get some Kleenexes?
I had like this attack.
Because I know you can edit this. So go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Go ahead.
It's all good. Real life.
So in 1992, I'm going to A school, and all of your instructors are former people that used to do your job. And so I remember that there was this wrestling event being hosted by the Central Navy Pacific League. And one of the yeoman chiefs, that's an E7, put a flyer out, said, wrestling tournament, Central Navy Pacific League this weekend. And I said, I'll go. It was a freestyle Greco-Roman wrestling tournament in Vallejo, California, which is, we'll just call it San Francisco Bay Area. And I participated in this wrestling tournament. Mm-hmm. I got the snot kicked out of me, but I still participated. And one other guy from my class went, so did the instructor. So as we're driving back through the Napa Valley, back to A school, this is when the instructor says, there's a reason we're here together today. And he said, God led me to put on this event and try to welcome people to attend and participate in it. That's where the conversation started. It's a little kind of thinking this guy's corny. What's he talking this God stuff with me for?
You're 20 now?
No.
How old are you?
19.
I'm 19.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. So I'm 19, and I said, okay. He drops us off, and I'm like, alrighty, we'll see you later.
Peace out, weirdo.
And I have no idea why, but he wanted to do a Bible study the next day. And I'm like, man, what does this dude want to do a Bible study for? So before I go to the Bible study, about an hour before.
So you went?
Yeah.
Did you go because of his stature and feeling obligated to?
I really don't know. If I'm being genuine with you, I don't know. But what I did is I went to the chapel about an hour before we had this Bible study, and I prayed.
Wow. How many times have you done that before?
I couldn't tell you, but that was one where I'm like, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I said, I don't know where you are in my life. And again, you're seeing tears now because, but these aren't tears of hurt. These are tears of joy, actually, because when you feel something so noticeably moving in you, and you can't describe it physiologically why, the only thing I could think of is God's Spirit is with me, and He is with me. Yeah. And that's when I can say, again, it's another one of those profound moments, and it's another milestone that you remember.
Yeah.
That's the first time I felt the Spirit of God.
Okay.
In my entire life. And so,
So that gave you the peace of mind then to go to the Bible study?
Yeah. Not just go to the Bible study.
Well, I mean, that's where it started though, right? Like it started you going to the chapel. And I was serious when I asked the question, like, was that the first time you had ever gone to the chapel to pray?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that's one big monumental step.
Yeah.
You're praying, you're having this physical, emotional, what do you want to call experience?
It's supernatural. I heard somebody use that term not too long ago. And, you know, we usually hear supernatural describing like aliens or something. And so supernatural becomes this phrase that sounds like, okay.
Right,
like we're not supposed to use that, but it really is supernatural. It's why you can't explain it. God is supernatural.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, so the Holy Spirit moving in you is that. Like you can't explain it.
So where I'm going with this is that this is this is the steps of the progression.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like you go to this wrestling thing. He starts talking about God in the car. You're kind of
like,
weirded out.
What?
He's inviting you to a Bible study.
Did you have a Bible?
No.
Okay. I wondered when you said, well, I'm going to go to a Bible study. Do you even have a Bible? No.
You go to the chapel.
Yeah.
to go to the chapel and then to decide that that's what you were going to do once you got there was to actually have a conversation with God. And then to have that emotional, physical experience to then actually go to the Bible study and no longer have the reservation. I don't know, maybe you still have the reservations, but you know, you weren't thinking like you did the day before, like weirdo. Now you're like, now I'm seeking this out. Now I'm interested. Now I've experienced something that makes me want to know more and feel more.
So that seed that was planted as a kid, as Jehovah's Witness, was still inside of me and growing.
Yep.
Okay. And I'll just tell you what my intuition tells me, that God was preparing me.
Yep.
And he was preparing me.
Yeah.
And it was his timing.
And it's exactly not my doing. It's his will and not mine. And that's the only thing I can deductively reduce that to.
Okay. Your mom's still alive though.
No.
Your mom had already passed by then?
Oh, I'm sorry. At that point, yes.
Okay.
My mother's
so
still alive.
I know, I can't, and forgive me if I don't have the timeline correct here, but you stopped drinking after your mother died.
Correct.
Right. Okay. So we're getting a little bit ahead. So now you're finding a relationship with God and you're trying to understand it because it's, you know, it's not like you just have it figured out when you have that experience. There's some work that takes place, but you're still drinking.
Yeah. Yeah. Still drinking. And, you know, the great thing about people who have a drinking problem or an addiction problem are the first to deny it. And, you know, that's the first kind of telltale sign that you've got an issue, or at least for me, it was. And, mine just got progressively worse because, again, just go back to think, you know, I've lost my biggest cheerleader in my life and I'm still reeling with how to deal with that.
Right.
The only way I could figure out how to do is drink to numb the pain. So if you fast forward, you know, past, and when I leave A school in Petaluma, I go to Omaha, Nebraska. Omaha, Nebraska, Coast Guard. I know a lot of people.
I was going to say, wait, are you still in the Coast Guard and you're in Nebraska?
Right. So
okay.
let's just do a quick, this is, what do they call this? Teachable moment.
Okay.
So let's give everybody a teachable moment in Papa Ron podcast world. The reason why the Coast Guard is in Omaha, Nebraska is because it is responsible for maintaining the aids to navigation on the Missouri River.
Oh.
Aids to navigation means the red and green buoys that you see marking where the deepest part of the river channel is, so that the barge and tug traffic that is coming up from the Mississippi River,
right,
which is coming up from the Gulf of Mexico,
yep.
Those waterways are what's considered federally navigable bodies of water. And as such, the Coast Guard is responsible for maintaining aids to navigation. And I went there as in I believe it was 14, 15 person station. And I was the storekeeper. So I was responsible for supply and logistics. So we would go out on the river from Sioux City, Iowa, all the way to, at some point in 93 when we had the Great Flood, all the way to Laclede's Landing in St. Louis. So that would be the patrol zone that, yes, in the Coast Guard in the middle of America, that we performed.
Wow.
And during the last year of my Coast Guard time, I get in trouble with alcohol again. This one's not so bad, but again, it's still, I broke the rules.
Yeah.
What happened, Joe? Well, me and Buddy were out partying one night, and we go and crash at this girl's house that lets us stay over there. He wakes up in the morning on time. I didn't. The ship left without me. And in the military, they call that missing movement. And so I went to I went to Captain's Mass again. So I went to Captain's Mass twice in my Coast Guard career, which means you basically went before the judge twice in the military. Now, the senior chief at that time said, Jonesy, I know you didn't mean this, but you can't do this. And I didn't get reduced in rank, anything like that. But, you know, he said, you're in trouble. Don't let this happen again. The next time you'll be kicked out of the Coast Guard.
Wow.
And so that pretty much ended all of my aspirations of wanting to stick it out for 20 years in the Coast Guard, because I didn't think I could do it. And so I opted to get out while I could still get a good conduct discharge. And go to college. And so that's what I did. I got out, went to college. Well, not right away. Moved, stayed in Omaha. Warner gets out of the Marines about a year later. Does a recruiting job for the Marines in Omaha. We become roommates. Working full time. He's working full time. He starts going to school. He's like, hey, man, you need to start using your GI Bill before it runs out. So this is like 2 years later after
you're out of the Coast Guard.
Yeah. So finally I decide, all right, I better start going to school. Well, along the way, you know, you meet people and your plans get changed. And so I pursued my degree while working a full-time job. This is where the drinking kind of lightened up a little bit, because I actually had to focus on school.
Yeah. Became more responsible.
More responsible. And if I'm being really transparent with you, I think most kids should probably go to the military right out of high school first before they decide what they want to do in college. Because I'll tell you what, when I went to college, I started at Metropolitan Community College in Omaha, Nebraska, getting my 2 years of prereqs done out of the way. Guys, if I would have known that college would have been this enjoyable, I would have started it sooner. Yeah. I enjoyed community college so much. This is where I found out a lot about creative writing. This is when I started writing a journal.
Okay.
Anyways, I enjoyed the time in college, working full-time college, going to school full-time. I had to do that to make it work. Fast forward somewhere in between, John decides he's going to move to Houston, Texas to go to optometry school. Joe Jones is still in Omaha, Nebraska. I'm like, okay, cool. He goes down to Houston. He gets a job, I think, working at Saks Fifth Avenue in one of their departments, and he quickly realizes he doesn't want to do that while he's waiting for to get his residency, so he doesn't have to pay out-of-state tuition. Well, so he sees an ad in the newspaper for a recruiter job. He applies for it. What do you know? He accepts the job. And this is where, again, your life changes. And he realized, if I were to paraphrase for him, he realized his first year of recruiting, he made almost $80,000. And in 1996 or 7, whenever that was a lot of money for not having a college degree and making $80,000.
Yeah.
So he kind of, went that way instead of optometry school. And when I was finishing my last year of college in 1999, he called me the year before and he said, hey, I want you to move down here and help me open this company. And I said, hey, I can't do that right now. I'm in my, senior year of college. And he's like, okay, well, just come down afterwards. You've got a job. I'm like, okay. Well, August of 1999, I want to make sure. I've visited a couple times, but I wanted to make sure before I came down that, yeah, Houston's really where I want to be.
Yeah.
So I come down to Houston that evening. Nothing really happened. The next evening we went out. We went out to a club called City Streets in Houston, Texas. It's not one of those meat market types of places. It's one of those clubs where you have a piano bar, you have a karaoke bar, a country bar, an 80s.
Sounds like the Power and Light District.
Okay. So we're there, and just cut to the chase. I end up meeting a girl, the girl who I'm now married to for 22 plus years.
Wow.
And it all happened like this. She accidentally bumped into me acting like it was an accident, and it wasn't. I knew that it wasn't, but I played that it was. I didn't really get a full view of her, though, of who she was. But later on, I saw her walking up this walkway, and I promise you, she was fully clothed, but she looked like a Victoria's Secret model walking the runway, and my jaw just dropped. Believe me when I tell you, love at first sight is real. Mm-hmm. And it was love at first sight. Okay. I saw her, and at that moment, I held my hand out to her. I didn't say a word. I just held my hand out to her, and she came to me. And so fast forward now. Yep, I'm moving to Houston.
Yeah, you are.
I'm moving to Houston. And so that's, in fact, I was so eager. My last class was on October 27th of 99. I remember it to this day.
Wow.
Last class was October 27th. And the following week, I packed up a U-Haul, and Bill O'Borney joined me and drove from Marysville, Kansas, down to Houston to move myself and my car down here.
Wow.
So I started.
Bill, by the way, is John's dad.
I assumed, yep. Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, been in Houston, came to Houston. I did something I took my first trip to Europe in the year 2000. I wanted to make it a very special engagement for my wife. I believe in singular marriages. I'm not, casting judgment on those who've been married more than once, but I had the idea of getting married once, so I wanted it to be special. So we did a Euro pass, and we went to Geneva, we went to Paris, we went to Munich. But in Paris, on December 24th, 2000, at the top of the Eiffel Tower, I proposed to my wife. Wow. I got down and on one knee and asked for my wife to marry me. Uh-huh. And fast forward from there, 2001, the next year, we get married. 2003, we have our first child, Alexis. And just kind of along the way, just for those of you wondering, I really stopped drinking. I really hadn't been drinking very much because I didn't have time. So I was focusing on work. I was focusing on raising a family. I was focusing on being that spouse that my wife fell in love with. And second child comes along. I don't know when after our second child was born, but there was something where I could start noticing something different about myself. Always just, I could start to see the fear and anxiety in my life starting to build, and I didn't really know for what reasons. So I finally...
Can I ask a question about
Sure.
that? So when you say fear and anxiety, so is it like the type of fear that's like paranoia, or what are you scared of?
Great question. Could have been anything. Ronnie, does Ronnie like what I'm wearing today?
Okay. So you're just not at peace. You're just on edge.
Just on edge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it.
Could have been a big thing. Could have been a small thing. Could have been like, what if I lose my job tomorrow? But it could have been, yeah, does he like my vest?
So one of the things that to this day, and my wife will tell you, what is one of Joe's biggest fears? Mm-hmm. Not being able to provide financially for my family. That is one of the biggest fears that I have. If you ask me what keeps you up at night, it's that. And then if you ask me the next question, well, Joe, in the last 20 years, when have you been without a paycheck? And I can tell you 0.
Sure.
So I go in to my general practice doctor. I say, Doc, listen, here's how I'm feeling. What do you do? What does he do? He gives me Lexapro. He says, all right, great. Here, this will help with the depression and anxiety. Great. Guess what? It did. It worked wonders for a while. And then it started not working. And then he's like, well, I want you to see a psychiatrist now. So we go to a psychiatrist. All right, psychiatrist, what's wrong with me? Well, clinically, the depression is part of it. Some characteristics of bipolarism. But at the end of the day, the doctor says, all right, we're going to give you this now on top of the Lexapro. So they give me Lamictal. Lamictal is a mood stabilizer. That works for a while. Fast forward, I don't remember how many kids we have now. 3 kids now. 2010, 2011, my mom's health is deteriorating. 2011, it's not looking good. 2012, and during 2011, I just can't take the stress anymore. I can't deal with life anymore.
Okay, let me stop you there because I'm starting to get a little bit off track and I want to get some clarity on some things. So we talk about the second child being born, and it was then that you start having the fear and the anxiety, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And then you start seeing a doctor, and the doctor is telling you that you're depressed. Were you depressed? Because you didn't use the word depressed. You used fear and anxiety. Were you suffering from depression?
Yes.
Do you know, was it the depression a product of your father's death? Were you still lingering? Were you still holding on to that? Was there any other monumental event that took place? What was it? I guess where I'm going with this is, What was it about the second child being born? Because it sounds like up to that point, things were going pretty good. Like the trajectory was really well, but then the second child comes. And I hope that if your second child listens to this, that they're not feeling like it's their fault.
They're like, damn, quit saying second child.
But it seems like in the story as you tell it, like that's when things kind of shifted.
Right.
Can you offer some clarity on that?
Yeah. So, the thoughts, to articulate to you what the thoughts and the feelings and the emotions are like at that time are kind of hard for me to do now. But what I can tell you is I just didn't feel like I was good enough. I didn't feel good enough.
Okay. So then would it be fair to say that because of the stress that you were putting on yourself, being that providing for your family was such in high regard, that the stress, internalizing the stress, and the amount of days backed up with one after the other of stress then led to depression?
Well, I think this is probably a good opportunity for me to enter this in here. When we were talking earlier, I've done a lot over the years to kind of understand what's my issue that I have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And, when I did go and see the medical doctors to try and understand what is my condition, first of all, what is the depression from? What is it? And, most of the medical authorities will, let you know, hey, it's because of some sort of chemical irregularity or chemical imbalance in your brain. If you go to Harvard Medicine, they'll agree with that to a degree, but they'll also say that it's because your brain doesn't regulate your mood the way it's supposed to. The other point that it mentions is that genetic predispositions are also causes for this. And then the last one is stressful or traumatic life events. The reason why I mentioned that last one, I want to kind of hover over that for a moment, is because it's not just one life event. Then all of a sudden you just show up and you say, all right, I'm a depressed person. It's a compilation of those stressful life events. And they may come and show up one day, or they may just gradually come in to your life if you let them. And after years of taking these placebos, these medicines that, I thought were helping me, quite frankly, I wasn't improving in my mental outlook on things. I had to find a way to fix this. Because here's the thing. My kids are watching me. my kids are witnessing this person that's slowly drinking, increasing it, becoming belligerent, becoming a jerk father, becoming a jerk husband. And, the only thing I can think of is, what can I do to improve this? I don't know what to do. I started doing it on my own, Ronnie. I mean, I started researching on my own what to work on. And quite frankly, it's been 2 years now that I've been without any psychotropic medicines from a psychiatrist or a medical doctor, because it wasn't working. And for me, I've shared with you my whole, thoughts on the fight or flight concept in life. We learn in psychology that, there's two mindsets. You're the type that's going to fight in the situation, or you're going to flee from that situation. But what they don't talk about is what's in between that. There's not just fight and there's not just flight, but there's this thing called life that's in between that we have to live.
Yep.
And for a long time, I was selfish because I didn't care about anybody else but myself and my own pain. And so once I started becoming more thoughtful, during this whole, I don't want to put too much emphasis on this, but I'll just tell it to you like this. The meds weren't working. There were moments where, driving off of a bridge wasn't too far of a bad idea. And realizing that the meds that I'm taking aren't working. What do I do to fix this? How do I get better? Because I cannot take that exit off that bridge and leave my wife and kids without me being around. So guess what? If you realize that that's really the play that you're going to stick with in your script, Joe, then do something about it. What are you going to do to change it?
So what did you do?
I got sober.
You had told me in the previous conversation, because I always try to have a preliminary conversation with any of our guests, and you said the way I took it rather was the passing of your mother was maybe one of the bigger influences to that, though.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So when my mother passed in 2012, beforehand, I remember the emotions and feeling going through that period of time. And
well, it sounds like that's kind of a double whammy. Like you're already going through all this stuff, and then you're seeing and knowing of her passing, and then it does, and that's just compounding the situation.
Right. And, back to what you'd asked earlier about depression, these are all a series of events over a person's life that impact the magnitude that you feel one way or the other in regards to mental wellness, mental health.
Yeah.
These are all things, like I said, depression doesn't just show up one day and say, hey, I'm here.
Right.
It's a journey too of stressful events that, they can make it higher, more extreme feeling or less extreme feeling. But anyways, my mom, when she passes, that's when I said, you know what? I've got to steal a line from one of my favorite movies, Shawshank Redemption, and either get busy living or get busy dying.
Wow.
And you have to do that. And so how do you do it though? So for me, it was real easy. And again,
real easy.
Well, let me rephrase that. Let me say that another way.
Sure.
The plan was easy.
So here's something that, cause I've shared with a few friends that I'm going to be doing this today. And so I'm going to tell you something that many people around me have never heard until today.
Oh, okay.
And it's out of, again, fear, what people are going to think of me as to why I've told this story this many years, the way I've told this story. A lot of people ask me, Joe, you going to grab a drink with us? No, can't. Oh, you don't drink? No, I don't. Why not? Well, back in such and such, when I started taking blood pressure medicine, I noticed that when I drink alcohol, it could kill me, which is truth, because I went to the ER after taking my blood pressure medicine, drinking wine, and I almost had a stroke.
Wow.
Wow.
But the real reason was I didn't want people to know that I had become an addicted person to alcohol. I didn't want people to know I was an alcoholic because I didn't want them to remember me. Oh, yep, just like your father.
Oh, yeah.
There's all that, that baggage.
Sure.
So for anybody that does listen to this, that's the story I've told to everybody at my work, everybody around me, with the exception of my close friends and family, is, I didn't want people to know I was an alcoholic. And the reality is I don't care anymore because
good for you.
There is a part of, I've been through, like I said, I've been sober since 2012, June 14th of 2012. I've been through the AA. I still practice the AA principles. I'm not as active in the meetings anymore, but I do work the program by reaching out and trying to help other alcoholics on a daily basis. This is something that had to be done because if I didn't, the next step was the grave. I literally was drinking myself to death. And when I made that decision to do that, it was not easy. I went to rehab. I did not like it. I did not like the next 90 days because it was the hardest thing I ever did, is to not drink alcohol. And all I can say is it gets easier. But what I've learned along the way is this. And for some reason, Jocko Willink happens to listen to your podcast. I'm giving him credit for this.
That would be pretty cool if you did.
Yeah. I've had a lot of mentors along the way, though, that have helped keep me sailing as straight as possible. And, Jocko, in one of his podcasts, he says, think of your brain like this. You've got the highest paid Wall Street attorney telling you, yes, do that. No, don't do that. The highest paid Wall Street attorney is your brain, which is what he's convincing you to do this or to not do this. What am I saying? Our brain is also a foe to us if we are not feeding it the right information. So for me, it wasn't just about drink. It was now, okay, what do I replace that with to get some sort of normalcy? And for me, it's always about cramming stuff in my brain that's positive, meaningful, and it's going to have hopefully leave a good impression or impact on somebody around me. Throughout, there's a lot of stuff that's, not mentioned, the thing that I would probably want more people to know than anything is that whatever you've heard right now, there's one thing that, and I'm a little shy about this only because I don't want to be viewed as that weird guy, like in the car when I was going to that wrestling tournament in California. But of everything that you've heard, there is one thing that's, really the part that's kept me glued in, and it needs to be heard, is God. I don't know how else to tell you than I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for him looking after me, for people around me, praying for me. Do you know that I think that John O'Borney and I are still alive today from our youth because his mother and father prayed so much for us?
You couldn't ask for two people who were followers of Christ than Mr. and Mrs. O'Borney. That's no offense to anybody else who follows Christ, but I'm just saying they were in the Word.
Yeah. And so, Ronnie, all this stuff, I thought about this and, what we're going to talk about on the show. The part that I think needs to be heard again is, there's so much stuff in this world that's around us that can be a stressful event, whether it's religion, politics, family, job, wars. There is so much negative influence around us that the only thing that I can tell you is that my belief in God and my constant feeding of my brain of other knowledge that's not knowledge I currently have is the only way that I keep the ship going. What you put in your brain is so important, not just your brains, but your body as well. These are things that we can control, that for people that have, struggle with bouts of depression or anxiety or fear like I do and any others, there's not a prescription out there that will fix it other than you fixing your own lifestyle, what you put in your body and what you put in your brain, and your belief in a higher power. I believe that the latter of all of those fixes any of the previous three things. That is what makes me be able to weep in joy, to weep in sadness, and to have that delicate balance, because I am firmly faithful of what I'm here for and who's guiding my life. And because of that, that helps remove a lot of that fear and that worry that I have. One of the things that a lot of people don't realize is that these things that we talk about from our past, this growing up in Marysville, well, there's one of the things that they teach you in Alcoholics Anonymous when you do your 5th step and you do your personal inventory. They tell you to make amends with as many things and people from your past so that you don't have resentments.
Have you done all that?
I sure have.
Good for you.
And
with everybody? I mean, it's got to be hard to do that with everybody, considering you've lived in all different parts of the world.
I've done it with everybody that was on my list.
Good for you.
And so in part of that discovery, though, in that inventory that I'll tell you is the resentments, the things that you and I, that we might think about from the past of like, I wish I would have done that better. Yeah. Or I wish I could have done that different. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that help intensify your depression, your anxiety. When you resent something, you re-feel it. You feel it again.
No doubt.
And so in Alcoholics Anonymous, they teach you, get rid of the resentments because that's what's going to cause you to drink. Become at peace with your past. This is the biggest struggle that so many people have, and the stigmatism that's surrounded mental health. People are fearful to talk about it. Mm-hmm. All I can tell you is today I'm alive because of a number of people, a number of mentors.
Yeah.
But now it's about what can I do to help others around me without
seeking opportunity to serve others, which is really what this podcast is all about.
Yeah.
Using people's testimony and their story of redemption to potentially give people hope.
Ronnie, I've got 2 girls now that are in college. I've got my youngest daughter that's a junior and my son that's in 7th grade. And the best thing that I can share with you that I've learned in this journey, and I don't know if you remember me telling you this or not, but again, I've become such a big fan of podcasts just to fill my brain with the type of information I need. And, the one thing, this one podcast that I heard the guy said, so do you think it's more impactful for somebody to be more positive or to be less negative? what do you think's more impactful? More positive people or less negative people? I had to think about that for a second because I'm the positive guy, right? Or at least that's what you see. But he said, actually, it's not that. It's less negativity. And I had to think about that for a second. I'm like, how do they cancel each other out? Where does, and if you think about it, it's no different than when we've heard our mentors say, if you want to be successful, surround yourself with successful people.
Yep.
So if you think about that, what does that mean? When we talk about it only takes one bad apple to ruin the bunch, think about it from that concept.
Okay.
So more positivity or less negativity. Well, if we have more negativity, that negativity is just going to spread like wildfire quicker than the positive energy. We know this because we've seen that Debbie the Downer, and sorry for all the Debbies out there.
Talking about my mom.
I know. Right? And that's exactly who I thought of.
She forgives you, I promise.
But that, yeah, it's just, if you think about that, more positive thought is a great concept, but us as human beings, think about this and apply it to your own community, your own household, whatever you want to call it. If you have people that are less infectious from a negative perspective, but more positive and uplifting, I mean, is it take a rocket scientist to figure out that that's a good thing?
You've gone down a rabbit hole, a deep one, to find out, what kind of purpose-driven life you wanted to live. And you've taken the time, you've put in the work to get the information. And there's a lot of information there.
there is. And that's just it. I didn't want too many stories to come into play here where we lost, what the overall message is. And we never really, yes, gratitude and empathy. I get the concept and the message, but what am I trying to do with you here today? You know what? When you made that post, if I'm being real with you for a second,
which one? The first one or the second one?
The post about you had a picture of me.
Oh, about you being here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you remember telling you, I'm like, all I could think of is like, what are the people from Marysville going to think or say when they see Ronnie's post?
And I asked you on that preliminary call, I said, there's going to be people from Marysville that are going to hear this. They're going to see this.
Right.
Are you okay with that?
Yeah. And, again, I'll tell you, the immediate thought was, what kind of trash talk am I going to see here? What kind of bad things are they going to say about me here? I have to tell you, I was so pleasantly surprised. The first comment I saw,
Bert Lord,
dude,
did that not rock? That was so awesome.
First comment I saw was from Bert Lord, our athletic director
and our football coach. And listen, to anybody else that made a comment, great and thank you and wonderful. But listen, I hold Bert Lord in such high regard because he is to me a gentle giant, without a doubt.
And to have somebody make that kind of remark to you is definitely a profound for me. So when I saw that, it just kind of wiped away any fear or whatever. And then, I started seeing more comments come in there, actually, and I've got to call this one out here because Jason Cohorst had made a comment on there.
Yeah.
And
which, before we get to that, Bert Lord had said about us doing this podcast that two very successful, respected, outstanding Marysville graduates.
Wow.
About Joe coming on here. And then you were getting ready to say Jason Cohorst said, great choice, should be interesting.
Right. So, and listen, because this, if we were to do a map, right, and specifically we want to talk about, addiction and alcoholism, we can trace it back to mine and Jason's and probably some other relationships.
Yeah.
But the reason why I specifically wanted to call out Jason real quick is because, having the ability for all of the kids to have cars and stuff, you had to rely on transportation.
Oh yeah.
So guess what? Jason Cohorst was reliable and kind enough to pick me up several times, transporting me in his blue 4x4 Toyota. And I'd remembered a couple times, hey, guess what we'd do before school? We would drink booze and go to school.
Yeah.
Did you ever think that happened back when we went to high school? I just thought I was being a deviant. But these are all things that I remember from back then. But
yeah.
Anyways, I'm sorry I didn't go off on a tangent there.
I'm glad you brought up Jason, because selfishly, I'm going to just give him a shout out as well, because you made, we talked about this in our first conversation before coming on here about how we were basically neighbors.
Yeah.
You lived a few blocks away.
No, 1 block away, not a
That's
few
right.
blocks.
That's right. It was
1
just
block.
basically right around the corner. So at that time I lived across the street from a park, and I remember one summer, and I spent a lot of time in that park playing baseball, basketball. I was a sports geek. And I remember one summer, and if Jason, I'm sure Jason's going to hear this, and he probably won't remember it, but it meant this much to me. All of these older kids show up to want to start playing basketball. We're talking about Linneman. We're talking about Bernard and Jason and Dedamore.
Yeah.
I'm naming people from Marysville that ran together.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all showing up because they're going to play a baseball game. And they're going to take over the field with me, basically throwing up against the backstop or whatever the hell I was doing. And Jason, knowing that he basically brought his buddies in there and bullied me out of that diamond, asked me to play.
Oh, wow.
And I was obviously, 3 years? Because they're younger than you, right? They're a year or two younger?
Just a
year younger.
Year
So,
younger.
yeah. So they would have been 3 years older than me. Again, at that age,
Yeah.
seems like
That's a lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
And I remember all of those guys didn't give, and I don't want to speak disparagingly against all those guys. I remember Alan Dedamore being a good dude
Yeah,
with me
he
at that
was.
age, but all the rest of the guys didn't give two shits about me. But Jason and Alan were just very kind, big hearted, and asking questions and wanted to help out and whatever. I don't remember all the details, but I just remember being fondly connected with them because of their graciousness to me at that age. So
Yeah.
if you guys are listening to that, I just think that was a cool moment. And when I saw that reply, it took me back to that time. Anyway,
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sorry.
No.
it's like a Marysville reunion here.
It's fine. It's just something I thought of as you've been talking, because obviously I'm having time to think about other things because I'm not reminiscing, right? Because it's not personal to me.
Right.
So when you brought up the weirdo in the car saying God and then inviting you to Bible study, and you're like, wait, okay.
Yeah.
But then you recall back to being 8, 9, 10 years old, right? And knowing that was a seed, then that guy was a seed. And so, and then you talk about going through depression and figuring out what's wrong with you and becoming sober and all these things. So at any point, what was your walk with Christ like at any point? Because we haven't really talked about that since the Bible study. Or if that's too confusing or convoluted and just whatever, maybe it's not a great detail. What is it like today? So it's a 2-part question. If you want to go back and talk about how it maybe ebbed and flowed, because I think it does in most people's lives, and if none of that is super relevant or something doesn't really stand out, I'm just curious what that looks like today.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, I think this is a huge part of my identity, actually. My issue is I'm not a very good evangelizer. But I'm not a very good evangelizer because my brain says I'm not. But I'd love to evangelize. But what I'll tell you is this. My relationship is very intimate. And it's very private. And when I say private, it's private with me and my family and I. Because listen, I've got an open mind, and I've become very tolerant and flexible to other, and sensitive to other people, their choices, beliefs, values, etc. in life. So I try to just keep it really simple like this. Here's what I'll tell you. I have a conversation with God every day, and every night, and sometimes a lot of times in between.
Mm-hmm.
And I look for 24 hours to expire, to repeat and do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And usually what my day starts with is me on my knees praying to God for guidance through the day.
Mm-hmm.
And every day, still to this day, for the last 12 years, I ask God to keep me sober today.
Mm.
And every night when I go to bed, if I'm still sober, I thank God for keeping me sober.
Mm.
Now, listen, I have some great ideas and great intentions, but I don't always do the best in execution.
Sure.
And as a Christ follower, believe me, my kids have seen the Antichrist follower as well, I'm sure. And what I would tell you is from the time that we started having children to now, that walk has gotten better.
Mm-hmm.
So much so that, I thought when, all of the kids, when they were born, we all prayed before they went to bed. We all prayed together as a family. Mm-hmm. And that kind of stopped after, I think, Chase was born. But we all prayed. Mm-hmm. And it was, again, something was part of our life. Now, that was that chapter in life. So what does it look like for me today? Very humble. God has taught me to be very humble. Mm-hmm. And that is the one thing that I would say that has helped me is humility is calming. If you can be humble, it has a calming effect to it. And that's really one of the things I need to do is be calm. Mm-hmm. And the only thing I can attribute that to is my higher power, because it's not me doing it.
Sure.
But I will also tell you that, there's days that I've got this look on my face that you'd think that I'm the greatest orator in the world, and I am trembling behind what you see. And it's not because of anything I know intuitively that caused it. Mm-hmm. It's just a condition that I still deal with on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. But what do I do to mitigate those emotions of fear and anxiety? Fill your brain with something else.
Right. Gratitude.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's interesting, and of course, this is me not knowing you, right? I met you 2 hours ago.
Yeah.
Right. 20 minutes before we started recording. So as you're talking and you're telling the story about the crazy guy in the car, right? One of the first things I hear come out of your mouth, and you don't have to tell this story, but you're talking about kind of being a crazy guy in the car because of your Uber ride here. And, you haven't told that story. I'm just telling you like how full circle that feels to me, not knowing you.
Oh, yeah.
Because of a moment you had in the car with a stranger.
That just got more trippy. Leave it to Jill to make it. No, seriously, that is really cool though. But that is deep.
Wow.
Now everybody's like, what the hell are they
What's
talking
the
about?
story?
Because
What's
we
the-
don't know
what do
the
you-
we don't know the Uber story. If you want to give a Cliff Notes version of that. Yeah.
The
Uber ride here. Yeah. So Joe was, by the way, before you get into that, thank you, because you literally got up early this morning, hopped on a flight from Houston to come here specifically to do this podcast,
right,
and to tell your testimony, share your story, spend some time with me. And that is just, I can't tell you on your own dime, when most podcasts would pay for some guests to do that kind of stuff. I even found out because you screwed up your own car rental. I said, dude, let me give you some Venmo money or something so that I can pay for your Uber, because I felt bad about that. But it turned out to be a blessing in a couple ways. And one of it was because of the experience you had on the drive here in the Uber car.
Wow. Now, are you talking about the Uber drive from my house, the testimony that I shared there?
I thought you were talking about the Uber ride from the airport to the house.
Whatever you said here, I don't know if it was in Texas or here.
Yeah, that
but
was
about,
in Texas.
about
Oh, it was. I thought it was on the way here.
It was about feeling anxious and going, what am I doing? Like,
yeah.
What am I doing flying to Kansas City to do this podcast? And who's going to, that whole thing of like, little.
I didn't realize that was in Texas. I thought it was on the way here.
Yeah, no, and that's great. Thank you for bringing that, because that is the rawness. That is the unplanned things that happen if you're faithful and you believe in your higher power. And so here's what happened. I mean, I'm stealing my notes because I had to write it down on the plane, or actually I wrote this down in the car as I was having these, feelings. But the thing is that the Cliff's Note version is I couldn't sleep last night. Toss, turn.
Was that because of anxiety of doing this?
Yeah.
Okay.
But more so about wanting to not necessarily sound right, but to have the right information for people to hear it and feel it and know that it's real and it's not just a figment or theory. And so less, 4 hours of sleep, feel like crap. Uber's out there waiting 10 minutes ahead of time. So I'm like, cool. Cause I've had Ubers for work that haven't showed up and I've been, in a tough spot.
Yeah.
And so the lady is there and I'm like, get in the car, and man, I'm sitting here going, why am I going to this thing? Is this really going to have an impact on anybody? So essentially my brain's that really high priced Wall Street attorney telling me, you don't need to do this.
Or maybe it's Satan.
Bingo. And so the Uber driver didn't say a word to me. A song comes on the radio, and I can tell instantly by the song that it's one of Hillsong's songs. And I don't even know what the title, I couldn't even hear the words. But at that moment, though, that doubt about, do they need to hear this? What am I doing this for? It was cleansed, man, because that song, and that's the great thing about music sometimes, and that's one of the things that I'll encourage people to do is when they need to get out of their heads is to listen to some music because it lets your brain go other ways. And so the song, it brought the presence of God in that car with me. I felt goosebumps is an understatement. I could feel, as I told you before, my first time experiencing the presence of God in the Coast Guard, this was right there with that.
Wow.
And then it just so happens that the Uber driver is a Christ follower as well. And I was weeping to her.
Wow. Because
I said, I can't tell you how much I needed to hear this message right now. Because I'm nobody really important, but I'm somebody from a community of people that helped shape me into the best version of what I can be.
Yeah.
And if there's anything I can give back to those people as an ounce of hope, as an ounce of motivation, I want to give that back to somebody.
I mean, you can look at that in so many different ways, whether it's giving it back to those people specifically, directly, or it's, say it's Bert Lord or Coach Knott, who is hearing this. And then they're going to say, man, I listened to this podcast with Phil Brucker and Joe Jones, and this is what they talked about. And maybe it's relevant to what that person is going through, or it's relevant to a family member that person's related to, because maybe they're dealing with abuse or substance abuse or something like depression or anxiety. So they listen to this podcast. My point in all of that is saying that there is so much power in testimony, and there's so much power in being in community. And that's what God asks us to do. And this is part of being in community. This is part about sharing testimony, being vulnerable, because it has the power of influencing and helping others.
And obedience when it feels crazy and it doesn't make sense. Because here's the thing. You could go back and you could say your obedience was booking the flight and getting in the Uber and not talking yourself out, right? But then you go, well, wait, there was obedience before that. Because the obedience was whatever your prior conversation was, and you not being like, dude, I'm busy. I whatever it was, and then you can go, wait, step back. Another step back would be something that had to do with the gratitude and empathy coffee, right? Because that's where you realize, you kind of made a recent connection.
Yeah.
So then you go, okay, well, was that the step of obedience? That was your first step of obedience, but you probably didn't even realize that in the moment, right? Like you didn't buy the coffee going, I want to be on this guy's podcast. Like that's not, it doesn't sound like that was your intention. So these little steps of obedience, like people think it's crazy to think that people actually surrender their entire life to Christ, that every detail matters, right? Well, he doesn't care what you eat for lunch. Maybe he does. Maybe he does. Because if I say, okay, I leave here and I'm like, I haven't had lunch and what am I going to eat? And I could eat at home or I could stop somewhere or whatever. Like, okay, well, maybe I'm supposed to eat at home to save money, or maybe God wants me to end up at Starbucks in front of the cashier there because whatever, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like every little detail really does matter. Now, do I pray about every single little detail and every decision I make? No. But I think we make all encompassing prayers. Like when you're talking about praying in the morning, that he would guide you and that you would think about it and not just go, oh, I really want a cheeseburger, but like, what should I do? And then know knowing his voice, knowing when an answer comes from him, big or small, then you're not going to talk me out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Because I could have that that argument that, okay, I really shouldn't go spend $10 at lunch. I should just wait till I get home.
Mm-hmm.
But if I'm feeling like I'm supposed to go to whatever, Freddy's, I don't know. And now I want Freddy's. I'm going to talk myself into it. You're not going to talk me out of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
100%.
If I know his voice, and the more you obey, big or small, the more you know. And sometimes it's not obeying, it's picking the wrong thing that was you. And you're like, ooh, now I know that wasn't his voice. That wasn't him telling me. That was
learning
me
the hard
taking
way.
over,
Yeah.
But all those little steps, all those little things of obedience that somebody would be like, ordering coffee, but like, you didn't have to do that, right? You didn't have to order his coffee and then post about it or text him about it or whatever it was. So all those little things, every little step of obedience, they all add up and matter.
Ronnie's mentioned that post that I sent to him a couple times, and it never really dawned on me until you were talking a minute ago. What really made me respond, Ronnie, is I felt you crying out. I could feel your struggles with this. And I was like, now you've often said to me, Ronnie, that you've looked up to me. Listen.
Here we go. I'm going to start crying.
Listen.
It's about time. I've cried 7 times and he's cried 27 times.
You're this kid that I bragged to my son about, saying, this guy's interviewed some really cool people, from the Chiefs, from the Royals, important government people, and he's interviewing me. My son was so proud.
Oh, man, that's cool. That is so cool.
And so, listen, what you're doing, Ronnie, is, you've been on radio, you've been on TV, and my neighbor knows who Ronnie is. My neighbor in my neighborhood, 4 houses down, knows who Ronnie is from Heartland Waterfowl.
Right.
Ronnie, you're impacting people's lives because you have your own screwed up stuff inside that you don't like the way it feels.
Yep.
And you're talking about it.
Yep.
Everybody else keeps it to themselves until they're motivated by somebody else who shares that vulnerability.
Yeah.
It's not about what one thing you did or didn't say. It's just, I could feel it. I could feel that you were going through this struggle. And it's kind of like, I could tell he's not bullshitting because some of the things he's saying, I've felt. And so I'm proud of you, man, for, taking you and Jillian, we talked a little bit, that you're taking what's important to you. And ultimately, I know that means what's important to God, because I know that you're a Christ follower as well. And I'm just proud of what you've done by trying to help these people. And, I reflect back to our days of growing up in Marysville. And you know what's sad? Do you know how many underclassmen and upperclassmen that we've lost because of drunken driving accidents?
Yep.
Because of things that happen in small towns?
Yep.
That's huge if you think about it. When you lose one from a graduating class of 77 people, that's a big number. But when you lose 5 of those, that's an even bigger number. So if there's something, what you're doing, Ronnie, is at least bringing it back to those people in our community, because believe me, they're listening. They may not they may not buy the coffee, but they're listening, dude. And if there's anything I can do is just thank you for showing your vulnerability and letting others be inspired by it.
I appreciate you saying that. Well, that put me on my heels a little bit. Look, the gratitude and empathy, I guess, is kind of a cry for help in a sense. Because as an entrepreneurial minded person who was doing so well before COVID, doing greater than I ever deserved, honestly. It was all about the money. It was, how can I make more money? How can I do more? Like that was what I was glorifying. That was what I was chasing. And that was what was most important. And now I'm being challenged with this particular venture. And I've told this to Jill all the time. And thank God for Jill, because I needed somebody who had a good faith-based foundation to partner with me on this, because then it helps me stay accountable for why I'm doing this in the first place. And the reality of this, though, is that it's not about the money. It's about the mission. And if God wants to bless us with some sort of financial reward, then by all means, glory to God. And I'm grateful for that. But I'm also still a business guy who understands that in order for this to be as successful as I want it to be, to reach as many people as it needs to reach, and potentially impact, then I have to put myself and ourselves in a financial position to where I have the resources to fund it.
Yeah.
And make it self-sufficient. And that's, like I said in the beginning, that's where the gratitude and empathy came out. I was wanting to do something that was going to provide value as opposed to asking for a handout. And so, yeah, I'm hoping, and thank you for supporting that. Thank you for buying the coffee and coming here to be a part of this. But this is important to me. And Jill, obviously, she's come along for this ride, and I'm grateful for it. This is us. I said this to you on the phone, like some people might walk along a highway and pick up trash to serve their community or to give back. Some people might work at a food pantry. And Jill and I have been blessed with the gift of gab and knowing a little bit from our days in doing radio and having a network of people. And so instead of making this about financial reward, we have been blessed with these talents. And hopefully we can then create a platform to use those talents to seek to serve others. And that's really what this is all about. And by getting the gratitude and empathy like you did, help support that. And that's really all we're trying to do. So, all right, we got to get close to wrapping this up, or I'm going to run out of card space on the cameras. But before we do, there's a couple people on the list. And there's a story that I'm going to maybe, actually, before we get to this, let me ask you this story.
Sure.
About this story, because we talked about this on the phone. I think, and you've kind of hinted to it before a few times in this discussion, is the worry, being worried about maybe what people might think. At one moment it's kind of like having the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. One's saying something in your ear and the other one's saying something else, right? There's one moment where you're like, I don't give a shit what people from Marysville think about this. This is about what I need to do. This is what I'm convicted to do. And then you got the devil in your ear going, maybe you should be concerned about it, right? So you've gone back with that struggle. You told a story about going back to Marysville one time.
Oh.
Do you mind if I go there?
Go there.
So Dr. Oborny, John's dad, passes away a couple years ago. Is that right? 2 or 3 years ago, maybe? I don't remember.
It's been longer. It's been 5 or 6 now.
Has it been that long? Okay.
Yeah.
And Joe goes back for the funeral. Keep in mind, I mean, it was like a second dad to you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
He's the one that helped you move from Nebraska to Texas, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
You're in the school. Is that right? Or
let me put it into the right frame of reference. This is back when they're dedicating the library to Dr. Oborny for his service to the school district.
That's what it was. And you come across an old teacher. And I don't know. I'm going to put that on you if you'd like to call her out. But I guess where I'm ultimately going, as opposed to getting a good, juicy story, is this is an opportunity for anybody who might be listening who does have some sort of ill thoughts or bad experiences with you or some sort of bad connection, for you to kind of speak your piece. You know, like you had an experience that moved you so much emotionally, and if you want and if comfortable with it, tell that story.
No, and actually, you know, I think it's a good story to hear, but maybe for a number of different reasons, and I'll let each person decide for their own what that is. But and listen, Lenora Bartek, I loved her to pieces I think it was math that she taught. Yeah. And you know, I remember we were sitting outside the breezeway of the junior high, or not the junior high office, but the superintendent's office. It was Lanny Carpenter, Tino Borney, myself, Lenora Bartek, and I was saying hi to Lanny. And I've just always respected Lanny. I thought he was a great guy.
He was the high school counselor.
Yeah. And he said, well, hey, Mrs. Bartek, you remember this guy, don't you? And she looked at me. She couldn't recognize me. And she goes, it's Joe Jones. And she's like, oh, one of the Jones kids. And,
no.
And I didn't show any emotion at the moment. It took me a couple minutes to process everything, but it made me, and then I remembered Lanny immediately. This is how great of a diplomat he was. He immediately said, oh, now Lenora, that's water under the bridge. You know, he was trying to say past is past, you know,
and probably do affirmation for you and what you've done. And
yeah. And, but I can remember talking to Tina later on and being in tears, telling her how much that impacted me, that the only memory that Mrs. Bartek had of me was, oh, I was one of those Jones kids, one of those troublemakers. And it just really, I mean, it dealt a blow to me.
Yeah.
Not necessarily just to ego, but self-worth, value. So just as much as our wonderful communities are great for building us up, can also be very destructive.
Yeah. A couple other people here as we get close to wrapping this up that we haven't talked about. We've talked about Coach Knott, Coach Pete, Coach Philippi, Coach Michael, which, by the way, I've got such a fond place in my heart for Coach Michael as well.
Heck yeah.
Because my mom worked at the school, I was the kid you had to have seen me there.
Of course.
I was always coming after school. I would come down to the practice field and I'd just sit there and watch these guys beat the hell out of each other in football practice. But I loved sports and I loved being there. And Coach Michael loved seeing me come every single day and invited me to be a part of the team, basically, by being the water boy on Friday nights. And I was ate up with it. Dave Raver and I talk about this all the time because that guy drank more water than anybody on the entire football team when he came off to the sideline. And he was so sweet and so gracious, except for one moment. One moment I wasn't paying attention to when Dave Raver was coming off the field and he screaming, water, like, give me the damn water, you know, and he was pissed. We joke about that to this day. But anyway, Coach Michael was a big part of me getting to live that experience, and I appreciate that. Coach Lowe, he was obviously the guy who followed up Coach Michael. Maybe speak to him about him and Mrs. Kroc.
Well, Coach Lowe, I mean, it's real simple. I mean, you know, he was the Jose Altuve of high school coaches. I say Jose Altuve because, you know, Coach Lowe was not very tall in stature, but just like Jose Altuve, I couldn't have I couldn't have told you another coach that had a heart as big as that dude right there, Coach Lowe. And listen, he was tenacious.
You guys kind of had some of the small guy syndrome similarities, didn't you?
Yeah, sure. But the thing is like this, you can't fake enthusiasm. Well, I suppose you could, but people can see if your desire, your intent, your drive, is it real or is it fabricated? And I think Coach Lowe could see what I was bringing to the table was real.
Yeah.
And he was one that would give me opportunities. Jonesy, get out there and do this. And it just so happened to work out. I didn't let him down.
Good. That's awesome.
And then you mentioned Miss Croc. There's so many people though. I mean, we could literally.
You had Mr. Crow on here. Did I see that?
You saw Mr. Crow as well. Yes. Mr. Crow, I'm telling you what.
Mr. Crow, can I stop you right there? Just a little explanation. So Mr. Crow was the, Greek
English literature.
Or Greek mythology.
And that too.
Yeah. So I had him for Greek mythology.
Okay.
Which was a subject that I hated.
What grade?
Ninth. I think it was freshman or sophomore year. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's cool. No, Mr. Crow, I love that guy. His wife was my first grade teacher, Mrs. Crow.
Okay, yeah.
But Mr. Crow, that guy was a walking encyclopedia. You learned something. I learned from him, take 1 tablespoon of honey every day without fail. That's one of the things that he would say. Hey, make sure you have 1 tablespoon of honey every day. And then
do you still do that?
I do. I take organic honey every day. I put it in my coffee.
Yeah.
Wow.
So
can I tell you, I'm going to interrupt real quick because this is my Mr. Crow story.
Yeah.
I use a saying to this day.
Cooking with bacon grease fat?
Nope. I use a saying, not that one, but I use a saying today, and I can't help it because somebody, you going to guess it?
Go ahead.
Somebody will say, what day is it?
Yes.
And I'll say, it's Tuesday all day unless it rains.
Yeah.
He would always say that. I don't know if I've ever understood what that really means. Yeah, but he would say, Mr. Crow, what day is it? It's Tuesday all day unless it rains. And that's exactly how he would say it.
So I'll just put this on your task list. Google it.
Okay.
Google it, because I think I did, and I think it actually tried to give me a reason
an
for
explanation.
Why they say that. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So I don't know how many times I've been on a Heartland waterfowl trip, and somebody will be, because you get out there and you're away from home and you're in your setting, and like somebody will be like, what day is it anyway? It's Tuesday all day unless it rains, to the point now where I got guys on my team who are doing the same thing, all because of Mr. Crow. Anyway.
So yeah.
Crazy.
So Mr. Crow, he was a farmer, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Sheep farmer.
Yeah. But this guy just had something about him. Now, in most cases, people would say this guy's a nerd, right? Because he wore a pocket protector.
Oh yeah.
But I was always stimulated by what he had to say.
Okay, cool.
And because of him is why Ernest Hemingway is one of my favorite authors to this day.
Wow.
Because he made me read Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. And if you ever read that book, there's some very divine moments in that book.
Okay.
About crucifixion.
Ah.
But anyways, so that was Mr. Crow. Mrs. Croc.
Yeah.
The reason why she's important, she was never a negative person.
That's true.
Always had a smile on her face. But to this day, the thing that I remember the most is because of her, we got Apple IIe computers. We got Apple IIe.
Jill, do you even remember what that is?
Well, no, I didn't go to public school. So, and I'm
true.
younger. I don't know when that happened, but I know. I don't know.
So we got Apple IIe computers. And to this day, I remember that we could learn to program. I mean, we could literally do DOS programming.
Yeah.
And so we did programming of best way I could say, a cartoon sketch.
Okay.
I wanted to draw this picture of this skateboarder jumping off of a ramp and landing. And she's like, yeah, you can do that. And so I created a script of a skateboarder jumping off of a ranch because of the class she taught. And people like her, people like Mrs. Harmer, these are all people, I don't even know if they teach business machines and typing in high school anymore.
Keyboarding. Typing is now keyboarding because you don't use a typewriter, you use a keyboard. Right?
Got it.
So yeah.
But gosh, Ronnie, there's such a long list. I mean, I could, so if anybody's not on that list, just know that if you were a teacher or a coach in Marysville, Kansas, that you had a profound impact on my life.
Look, we're going to wrap this up, but I just want to say this, and I know I've told you this before in private, but I don't think, and I hope that you don't have any reservations about what the hell people in Marysville think. I get it. It's normal. Right. And so I respect you having that apprehension. Yes. Wow. That was weird. Because being in the limelight and being what I've done, I've wondered, occasionally, what's the impression of me now that I'm gone? And you hear things much like you have heard things, and I guess where I'm ultimately going is the people who matter, the people with big hearts, the people who care, the people who love, the people who inspire, the people who lift up, the people who pray for you, people who pray for others. Those are the people that matter.
If I could give you one thing because I feel like this person being one of my mentors for such a long time, and this is because of John O'Borney, by the way. This person being a mentor for not just me, but our entire company. His name's Zig Ziglar.
Oh yeah.
And John used to make us watch these at the time it was cassette tapes of Zig's book called Over the Top.
Yeah.
And so that was part of our training. We learned Zig Ziglar. Well, if you know Zig Ziglar, he was a Christ follower.
Yeah.
And so if you want somebody that's motivating your staff, who better than a Christ follower?
Right.
So I know that was John's, hidden agenda behind it, but more power to him because it was one of the best things ever happened. So one of the couple things that I would like to encourage the people that are in our community. Number one, stop talking about divisive things, specifically politics. Knock it off. We are sacrificing friendships and relationships over politics. Stop it.
I'm guilty of it.
Well, listen, you heard me say earlier, not more positive talk, less negative.
Yeah.
So I'm asking for less negative from everybody. And politics is one of the ways that makes us do things and say things. Guys and gals, listen, we're all going to have our opinions. We're going to have our own value systems. Don't tell other people what to do. Respect them for what they do, even if you don't agree with it. Be humble and empathize.
Yeah, empathy.
Be empathetic to your people around you. And I hope, I don't know if Mark Nish is still connected with you or not, but...
Well, it's funny you bring up having a conversation about politics.
Well, and that's why I'm bringing it up is because of that, because
he brought it up to you about our falling out?
No, him and I fell out.
Oh, okay.
Because...
so did we. Mark Nish is our old football coach and American history teacher.
Okay.
Right. And I'll have you know that I fell in love with history today.
Me too.
Because of Mark Nish.
100%.
I am a history fanatic because of Mark Nish.
Yep.
But what's different is we don't agree on politics. And politics get personal.
Yep.
And when you get personal, you offend people.
Yep.
So guess what? I'm not sitting here to convince you that we have what's called an oligarchy in politics, but it's pretty damn close. The elite perpetuating the elite. As Trump has called it before, the swamp, as many others have called it before, the swamp. Mm-hmm. If it's the swamp, stay the hell away from it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That means stay the hell away from the conversations.
Mm-hmm.
if we remember the golden rules that our parents taught us, if you don't have anything nice to say, then let me give you Joe Jones' version, then shut up.
Yeah.
Don't say it.
And treat people how you want to be treated.
That's just
it's really that simple.
I think it is important to continue having conversations. Like, I want to make sure that, I think we're on the same page here. I think having conversation is healthy. It's good. It's being respectful to each other and not belittling or diminishing someone because their viewpoint doesn't align with yours.
Yes.
And if I could add to that, sometimes people can think they're being respectful because they're not arguing. And while that's true, right? Listening is so big. Listening to what the other person is saying. It doesn't mean listening to change your mind.
Yeah.
It means listening and then respond to what's being said to you. That's what listening does. If you're actually listening, you're going to respond to what I say. And we're all guilty of it because especially like take a setting like this, like it's the reason I am asking kind of off the wall, way late questions because I'm listening, but I'm hearing it differently because I'm not reminiscing, right? I'm listening and I'm hearing other things.
You're hearing the content.
And so if we're having a conversation and we're disagreeing about something and all I'm getting to is my next thing I want to say. And I'm like, I got bullet points and this is what you need to know from me because this is what I have to say.
Then you're not listening.
Then I'm not listening and I'm not responding to what you're saying. I'm just grabbing my bag of things I want to say and saying them and spewing them at you.
You know? And that's really, in my opinion, it's a product of being empathetic. And that's and that's the thing that I'm really trying to challenge myself with everything that I've been through. And what has really inspired this podcast is waking up instead of thinking about what I don't have and feeling pity for what I have lost. It's, hey, having gratitude for what I do have and opening up my ears and my heart with having empathy for others, even when it's not convenient.
Right.
And so listening is a tool to being empathetic.
Sure.
And Ronnie, I was going to say the one quotable that I wanted, to share, because this is what has been the cornerstone of my life since I learned it from Zig Ziglar. And again, thanks to, John Alborny for, training his employees. The one thing that he said, man, he said many things, but the one profound thing that he said to me that I hope to pass on to everyone else and that everyone else implements it in their own life. And that is this: you just remember, you can have everything in life you want, everything, as long as you help enough other people get what they want first.
Love that. I absolutely love
and this
that.
is something that if we think about that, if we meditate on that, and then we do it, a lot of these things about depression, anxiety, we get out of our heads.
Yeah.
We're removing the stress.
Yep.
We're helping others. Do you know that by helping others, it helps you?
Yeah. It's become a new mission of mine. I keep saying it over and over, seeking and not letting it show up in my lap. And I'm not trying to say I'm great at it. Like it's still a challenge every day. But like instead of something showing up on my lap and then serving, like actually actively going out in the world, seeking opportunity to serve others. And it might be somebody who's, like, for example, I mean, this is probably a terrible example, but like a buddy of mine had an Achilles. He's on our Heartland Waterfowl team. He had an Achilles surgery like 3 weeks ago. And I know all he's doing is laying there because that's all he can do for 6 weeks is just do nothing and not be on his foot. But like, hey, can I reach out to him? Just, hey man, I'm thinking about you. Just checking on you. You doing okay? If you need to talk, you get bored, let me know. It's just little things like that, because I know that when you are depressed with anxiety and suicidal ideation, you feel alone.
Yes.
Yeah. So how can you help others not feel alone and feel loved and be a part of community?
Avoid isolation.
Yep. 100%.
Avoid isolation. Ronnie, eating the right things is important.
Yeah. I'm terrible about that part.
The biggest thing that we all can do that we can't use the excuse, I'm lazy, exercise. 30 minutes of cardiovascular exercise every day, brought to me by my, God rest his soul, past father-in-law, cardiologist for 45 years. Every day he says, Joe, Indian guy, right? So he's like, Joe, American Medical Association says 30 minutes of cardiovascular exercise every day. You'll be surprised at what it does, because that's what helps those chemicals in your brain move around.
Yeah. I know that's two things right there that I need to work on is
Same.
eating better and doing some cardio.
Same.
I love you, dude. I really do. Thank you.
Thank you, man. Love you
thank
too,
you
brother.
for being, not only being here, and I told you this again in private, I'm going to say it because I want anybody who's listening to hear it, that regardless of what you think the opinion is of you from people in our past, you were a good dude to me.
Thank you, Ronnie.
You were a person, along with John, that I remember just uplifting, supporting, having our back. I know that if there was anybody who crossed me, you would have beat their ass because that's what you did back in the day.
Yeah.
You would have had my back. You and I connected on social media. I didn't know how those conversations were going to go, but you were always so kind, so gracious, always asking questions. Tell me about this. I'm so proud of you. I'm cheering me on. You went and bought a freaking bag of coffee. I had no idea you did it until after you bought it. You know, it's those little things in life that you have always done to show love and support. And I will never forget it. And then on your own dime, you flew here to be a part of this. And that just means the world to me. So thank you.
I'm just glad to be here with Ronnie.
And you went through this entire podcast without calling me Phil once.
I know.
You didn't call me Phil once.
I know.
This entire
That's
deal.
impressive. That's impressive.
Hey, so once again, I hope you check out the gratitude and empathy at dirty.coffee.com and use promo code PAPA, whether it's with the gratitude and empathy or any of their other coffee blends, be it a hat, t-shirt, hoodie, whatever it might be. All of that tells the people at dirty.coffee that we sent you there. And then that helps support our mission here at the Papa Ron Podcast. In closing, I'd also like to thank the fine folks over at Brown Piercy Cattle Company. They've been serving and breeding registered Angus cattle for generations with one thought in mind: quality beef for consumers. Their goal is to deliver prime graded beef directly to customers' homes more affordably than you can purchase them at the store. Better beef conveniently delivered at a lower price than the grocery store. Find them online at brownpiercycattle.com. So let's wrap this up. You got some family you're going to spend some time with tonight. Is that right?
I am. I'm going to be going just right across the way in Lee's Summit to see my cousin.
Nice. Well, see, you got to kill a couple birds with one stone while being here.
Indeed.
I love it. Thank you. Joe Jones, Jillian, Greg, thank you for being here. That's going to wrap up episode 43 of the Papa Ron Podcast. Thanks for listening or watching.
You've been listening to the Papa Ron Podcast. If you enjoy this podcast, hit subscribe now on the podcast platform. Follow the Papa Ron Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And while you're there, like, comment, and share. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Papa Ron Podcast. Papa Ron Podcast. The Papa Ron Podcast.